rush hour transformed Megamart into a living organism of fluorescent light and hurried footsteps. The supermarket sprawled across 40,000 square feet of suburban Boston real estate, its aisles packed with shoppers navigating the Friday evening ritual of restocking refrigerators and pantries for the weekend ahead. Overhead speakers droned promotional announcements about discounted ground beef and two-for-one deals on breakfast cereal, the recorded voice competing with the squeak of shopping cart wheels against polished concrete floors. Near the entrance, a mother wrestled with a toddler, demanding candy from the checkout displays, while her husband loaded groceries onto the conveyor belt with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had performed this task 1,000 times before. In the wine section, positioned between imported Italian varieties and domestic California selections, Diana Ashford examined a bottle of Chateau Margaux with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to quality. The CEO of Ashford Medical Technologies cut a striking figure, even in a casual Friday context. Her burgundy business dress, tailored precisely to her athletic frame, her chestnut hair styled in a professional bob that required 45 minutes of attention each morning. She had come straight from the office, her mind still processing the quarterly projections she had reviewed with her CFO, and the wine selection represented a small reward for another week of 16-hour days, building a company that would revolutionize medical diagnostics. She did not notice the two men moving through the store with purpose rather than shopping intent. The taller of the pair positioned himself at the far end of the wine aisle, pretending to examine a display of discount Chardonnay while his eyes tracked Diana's movements with predatory focus. His partner circled from the opposite direction, timing his approach to intercept her path at the precise moment she reached for the champagne section. Both wore nondescript clothing, jeans, dark jackets, baseball caps pulled low, the uniform of anonymity in any American retail environment. Diana's fingers closed around a bottle of Veuve Clicquot when the pressure materialized against her left side, something sharp, metallic, unmistakable in its threat. The taller man had materialized beside her with the silent efficiency of someone trained in close-quarters operations. His voice emerged low and controlled, barely audible above the ambient noise of the supermarket. "Don't make a sound. Walk with us toward the back exit, nice and quiet, and nobody gets hurt." The champagne bottle slipped from her grip. It struck the floor with a sound like a gunshot glass exploding across the polished, concrete golden liquid, spreading in a widening pool that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Nearby shoppers turned at the noise, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm as they registered the tableau, the well-dressed woman frozen in place, the two men flanking her, the glint of something metallic pressed against expensive fabric. Diana's corporate composure shattered in that instant. The woman who commanded board meetings and negotiated million-dollar contracts found herself reduced to the most primitive form of human plea. "Someone help me, please." The response from the surrounding shoppers carved itself into her memory with the precision of a surgical incision. A middle-aged woman with a cart full of frozen dinners glanced over, assessed the situation, and deliberately turned away. An elderly man shuffled past with his eyes fixed firmly on his shopping list, refusing to acknowledge what was happening 3 feet from his position. A young mother grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her rapidly in the opposite direction, abandoning her half-filled cart in her haste to distance herself from danger. One voice rose above the general murmur of avoidance, belonging to a heavy-set woman in a Patriots sweatshirt who had paused to observe the scene with something approaching satisfaction. "Looks like the rich lady's having problems. Maybe if she wasn't so high and mighty, all the time someone might actually care." The words struck Diana with physical force. She recognized this woman, or rather this type of woman. The resentful gaze, the bitter satisfaction at witnessing someone else's misfortune, the comfortable assumption that wealth and success somehow justified indifference to human suffering. Diana had built her career on the premise that results mattered more than relationships, that excellence excused everything. Now, in her moment of desperate need, that philosophy was being reflected back at her through the eyes of strangers who saw no reason to intervene on behalf of someone they perceived as deserving her fate. The second attacker, shorter, with the compact build of someone who had spent years in physical training, tightened his grip on her arm and began guiding her toward the service corridor that connected the retail floor to the loading docks. The route had been planned in advance, Diana realized with growing horror. These men knew the store's layout, had identified the blind spots and camera coverage, had calculated the precise timing of security patrol rotations. This was not opportunistic violence. This was a professional operation. And then a voice cut through the chaos with the calm authority of someone who had spent a lifetime managing crisis situations. You just picked the wrong father and daughter to threaten gentlemen. Every conversation in the wine section ceased. Shopping carts stopped mid-roll. The ambient soundtrack of commercial activity gave way to a silence so complete that Diana could hear the electrical hum of the refrigeration units in the adjacent dairy section. The man who had spoken stood approximately 20 feet away, positioned at the intersection of the wine aisle and the main thoroughfare that ran the length of the store. He appeared utterly ordinary at first glance, mid-30s, medium height, brown hair showing early threads of gray at the temples. He wore a faded flannel shirt over worn jeans, the wardrobe of someone who worked with his hands and didn't particularly care about fashion trends. His shopping cart contained the modest provisions of a carefully budgeted household store brand milk, a loaf of whole wheat bread, a package of chicken breasts marked with a yellow discount sticker. But his posture told a different story. The way he held himself suggested training discipline and awareness of spatial relationships that went far beyond the requirements of grocery shopping. His eyes moved across the scene with methodical precision, cataloging threats and resources, calculating angles and distances, processing information at a speed that spoke to years of professional experience. In the cart's child seat, a little girl of perhaps 8 years watched the unfolding drama with wide blue eyes. She clutched a piece of paper covered in careful blue handwriting, a shopping list Diana would later learn, and her other hand gripped a small, stuffed bear with the fierce protectiveness of childhood attachment. On the man's wrist, incongruous against his practical appearance, a bracelet woven from red yarn caught the fluorescent light. The taller attacker's response carried the dismissive confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating ordinary citizens. "Back off, Dad. This doesn't concern you." The man in flannel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words that followed carried the weight of absolute certainty. "When you threaten people in front of my daughter, it becomes my concern. And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when you make it my concern." Diana would later struggle to reconstruct the precise sequence of events that followed. Her memory retained impressions rather than chronological details, fragments of motion and sound that her traumatized consciousness assembled into something approximating narrative only after multiple retellings. The shorter attacker released her arm and turned to face the new threat, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. The man in flannel was already in motion, having anticipated the reaction with the prescience of someone who had spent years studying violent human behavior. A bottle of soda appeared in his hand. Where had it come from? Diana hadn't seen him pick it up, and he shook it vigorously while simultaneously unscrewing the cap. Pressurized liquid erupted in a focused stream that caught the taller attacker directly in the face. The combination of carbonation, artificial coloring, and sugar created an instant chemical assault on sensitive tissue. The man staggered backward, clawing at his eyes, the knife clattering to the floor as his hands abandoned their grip in favor of addressing the searing pain that had invaded his vision. The shopping cart became a weapon. The man in flannel drove it forward with surprising force, the metal frame connecting with the blinded attacker's midsection and sending him sprawling across the wet floor. Bottles toppled from nearby shelves, adding to the chaos of broken glass and spreading liquid that transformed the wine section into a hazardous obstacle course. But the shorter attacker was already recovering from his initial surprise. He lunged forward with a closed fist, and Diana saw the man in flannel twist to avoid the blow not quite fast enough. The punch connected with his rib cage, producing a grunt of pain that suggested real damage beneath the flannel fabric. The two men circled each other in the cramped space between the wine racks, their movements tracked by dozens of smartphone cameras as shoppers documented the confrontation rather than intervening. Diana pressed herself against the display of champagne flutes, her heart hammering against her ribs, her expensive dress soaked with wine and sticky soda residue. Recognition flickered across the shorter attacker's face as he studied his opponent more carefully. "Noah Cole, is that you?" The man in flannel, Noah, apparently used the moment of hesitation to his advantage. His foot swept low, catching the shorter man's ankle and sending him off balance. The attacker's head struck the edge of a metal shelf as he fell, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but sufficient to disorient him for the crucial seconds that followed. The taller man had recovered enough to scramble to his feet, still blinking against the chemical assault on his eyes. Noah grabbed a mop bucket from a nearby cleaning station. Diana hadn't even noticed it there and upended its contents across the floor in the attacker's path. Industrial cleaning solution mixed with the already treacherous surface of spilled wine and soda, creating a sleck that sent the man crashing down again the moment his feet attempted to find purchase. And then an older man stepped out of the crowd that had gathered to watch. He moved with the economical precision of someone who had spent decades in environments where wasted motion could mean death. Silver hair cut military short, weathered features arranged in an expression of calm assessment, a bearing that suggested authority earned rather than assumed. He placed one booted foot on the chest of the shorter attacker, who had begun to stir from his impact with the shelving unit. "Stay down, son. You've made enough bad decisions today." The words carried no particular menace, but the attacker apparently recognized something in the older man's posture, perhaps the same quality that Diana had glimpsed in Noah, because he stopped struggling and lay still against the wine-stained floor. Total elapsed time from Noah's intervention to both attackers being subdued 43 seconds. The silence that followed held a dreamlike quality, broken only by the distant squeak of shopping cart wheels and the tinny voice of the PA system announcing a cleanup needed in aisle 7. Diana found herself staring at Noah Cole, who was pressing one hand against his injured ribs, while his other hand reached for the little girl in the shopping cart. "Daddy, did you win?" The child's voice cut through the tension with innocent clarity. Noah's response came in a tone that suggested extraordinary effort to maintain normalcy for his daughter's benefit. "We all won, sweetheart. The bad men can't hurt anyone now." Security guards finally appeared at the end of the aisle, followed almost immediately by the wail of police sirens from the parking lot. The cavalry had arrived, Diana thought with bitter irony, precisely too late to be of any use whatsoever. The little girl held up her shopping list, and Diana caught a glimpse of careful blue handwriting, "Milkbread Small Bear" underlined 3 times, and below that in fresh letters that must have been added during the confrontation. "Daddy is brave." Diana Ashford, CEO of a company worth $300 million, found herself weeping amid the broken glass and spilled wine of a suburban supermarket. Not from fear, though that emotion certainly contributed, but from the sudden devastating recognition that she had just been saved by the very type of person she had spent her career dismissing as beneath her notice. The man in the flannel shirt with the red yarn bracelet and the daughter who believed he was brave. The type of person who had once worked in her building, installed her computer equipment, and been treated like furniture by everyone in her organization, including herself. 24 hours earlier, Marcus Webb had awakened to the familiar weight of responsibility that had defined his existence for the past 3 years. The name on his birth certificate read Marcus Andrew Webb, though he had answered to various iterations throughout his 35 years of life. His mother had called him Mark. His college roommates had preferred Webb, and his wife, Rachel, had used the full Marcus, with an affection that transformed the formal name into something intimate. Now only one person in the world addressed him by any name at all on a daily basis, and she called him Daddy. The bedroom of their small ranch house in Quincy, Massachusetts, held the accumulated evidence of a life reconstructed from tragedy. On the nightstand, a framed photograph showed a woman with auburn hair and laughing green eyes, Rachel, on their wedding day, captured mid-laugh at something Marcus had said just before the photographer clicked the shutter. Beside it, a smaller frame displayed the same woman holding a newborn infant, exhaustion and joy competing for dominance in her expression. That photograph was 8 years old now, and the infant had grown into the little girl currently sleeping in the room across the hallway. Marcus rose at 6:15, as he did every weekday morning, and padded to the bathroom with the practiced silence of someone who had learned not to wake a sleeping child. The face in the mirror looked older than 35 fatigue lines bracketing his eyes, gray threading more prominently through his brown hair than it had even 6 months ago. He had lost weight since Rachel's death, the result of meals eaten, standing over the kitchen sink between shifts rather than proper dinners at a proper table. The flannel shirt hanging on the back of the bathroom door was the same one he would wear to Megamart the following evening, though he had no way of knowing then that it would become the costume of reluctant heroism. The routine that followed was the product of countless repetitions refined over 3 years into maximum efficiency. Coffee started brewing while he showered. Breakfast preparations. Emma's overnight oats soaking in their designated container, his own modest meal of toast and peanut butter completed while the coffee finished. Clothes for Emma laid out on her bed. The purple sweater she loved, jeans without holes in the knees, matching socks, extracted from the basket of laundry he had folded the previous night while watching the late news. By 6:45, he stood in Emma's doorway watching her sleep with the fierce tendernesses that only single parents understand. She had Rachel's auburn hair and his own blue-gray eyes, a genetic combination that sometimes struck him as cosmically unfair, carrying pieces of both her parents and features that reminded him daily of what they had lost. At 8 years old, Emma possessed a solemnity that seemed beyond her years, tempered by flashes of childish joy that reminded Marcus why he bothered getting up each morning. He crossed to her bed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Time to wake up, sweetheart." Emma's eyes opened with the instant alertness of a child accustomed to their father's bedroom. "Is it a school day?" "Friday, last one before the weekend." She processed this information with visible satisfaction, then reached for the stuffed bear that had shared her pillow since infancy, the bear Mr. Buttons, named during a phase when Emma had been fascinated by his grandmother's sewing box, showed the wear of countless cuddles, one ear held on by emergency stitching that Marcus had performed with a first aid kit in questionable technique. "Can we go to the store tonight? You promised about the small bear." The request triggered a cascade of mental calculations, budget remaining until payday, outstanding bills, the cost of a small stuffed animal, versus the value of keeping a promise to a child who had already learned too young that life didn't always deliver on its promises. "If you're ready for school on time, we'll go to Megamart after I pick you up." Emma was out of bed before he finished speaking, moving toward the bathroom with a purpose that suggested she took the conditional nature of his promise very seriously indeed. Marcus returned to the kitchen and poured his first cup of coffee, standing at the window that overlooked their modest backyard. The lawn needed mowing, another task for the weekend list, and the fence along the property line had developed a lean that would require attention before winter set in. The house had been a stretch when he and Rachel bought it, their combined salaries barely covering the mortgage payment, but it had represented something important: stability, permanence, a foundation on which to build a family. Now Marcus maintained it alone, patching and repairing and improvising with the determination of someone who refused to let the physical infrastructure of his life deteriorate along with everything else that had crumbled since Rachel's accident. His phone buzzed with a text message from his supervisor at Northeastern Technical Solutions, the IT contracting firm that employed him for 40 hours a week of computer repair, network troubleshooting, and the kind of tedious maintenance task that kept modern offices functioning. "Henderson account needs afternoon coverage. Can you stay until 6? Marcus typed his response with one thumb while sipping coffee with his free hand. "Have to pick up my daughter at 4, sorry." The reply came immediately, carrying the passive-aggressive tone of a manager who didn't have children and didn't understand why anyone would prioritize family over billable hours. "This is the third time this month. We need to discuss your commitment level." Marcus set the phone down without responding. The conversation would happen eventually, it always did, and he would explain again that his daughter's schedule was non-negotiable and his supervisor would make disapproving notes in his personnel file, and nothing would fundamentally change because Marcus Webb was too competent at his job to fire over something as mundane as daycare pickup times. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in the purple sweater and jeans, her hair arranged in the French braid that Marcus had learned to create through YouTube tutorials and many frustrated attempts. "I'm ready, and I made my bed." "Good girl. Come eat your breakfast." They shared the morning meal in the comfortable silence of people who knew each other's rhythms intimately. Emma spooned overnight oats while Marcus finished his toast, both of them watching through the kitchen window as their elderly neighbor walked his ancient beagle along the sidewalk. The normalcy of the scene, the mundane routine of a Thursday morning in suburban Massachusetts, provided no hint of the extraordinary events that would unfold less than 30 hours later. "Daddy, why do you have to work tonight?" The question emerged between bites, Emma's tone, carefully casual, in the way children adopt when asking about things they suspect their parents would prefer not to discuss. "Because we need money to pay for things like this house and your food and the small bear we're going to get tomorrow." Joey's dad doesn't work at night. He coaches Joey's baseball team. Marcus set down his coffee cup and gave his daughter his full attention, a practice Rachel had insisted upon during serious conversations, and one that Marcus had maintained even after losing the person who had taught him its importance. "Different families have different situations, sweetheart. Joey's dad has a different kind of job. My night job helps make sure we have enough for everything we need. Emma considered this explanation with the gravity she brought to all information processing. Is it because Mommy isn't here anymore? The question struck Marcus like a physical blow, though he maintained his composure through years of practice. Partly, when Mommy was here she worked too, and together we made enough that I didn't need the extra job. Now it's just me, so I have to work more to make sure we have everything we need. What if I got a job, then you wouldn't have to work so much? The innocent suggestion, entirely serious in Emma's 8-year-old logic, brought a genuine smile to Marcus's face despite the ache in his chest. Your job right now is to go to school, learn as much as you can, and be a kid. That's the most important job anyone could have. Being a kid isn't a job. It's the hardest job there is. Trust me. The school bus arrived at 7:22 as it did every weekday morning, and Marcus walked Emma to the corner where 3 other neighborhood children had waited with their parents. The ritual of morning drop-off involved the usual exchanges, waves, and half-hearted conversations about weather and weekend plans before the yellow bus doors closed and carried the children toward another day of education. Marcus stood on the corner until the bus disappeared around the bend on Maple Street, then returned to the house to gather his own materials for the workday ahead. His IT kit occupied a corner of the living room, a rolling cart loaded with diagnostic equipment, cables, spare parts, and the accumulated tools of a profession that most people only notice when something went wrong. The drive to his first assignment, a dental office in Cambridge, with a server that had stopped communicating with their patient management system, took 23 minutes through moderate traffic. Marcus used the time to mentally prepare for the day ahead, running through the likely diagnoses and solutions with the automatic competence of someone who had been troubleshooting technology problems for over a decade. What he did not think about during that ordinary Thursday morning commute was the career he had abandoned to reach this point. The years of security training, the crisis management expertise, the professional recognition that had once seemed like the foundation of a promising future. Those memories lived in a compartment of his mind that he rarely opened, protected by the same emotional walls he had constructed after Rachel's death. To access them would require acknowledging everything he had given up, not just his career, but his identity as someone capable of making a difference in situations more significant than crashed computers and disconnected networks. The IT work paid the bills. It kept Emma fed and housed and enrolled in a good school district. It provided the schedule flexibility that allowed him to be present for his daughter in ways that his previous career never would have permitted. It was enough. It had to be enough, because Marcus Webb had learned the hard way that reaching for more than enough was a luxury he could no longer afford. The memories of his previous life surfaced unbidden during his lunch break, triggered by a news segment playing on the television in the dental office waiting room. The story concerned a corporate kidnapping in New York, executives taken from a parking garage ransom, demands eventual rescue by FBI hostage negotiators. The reporter interviewed a security consultant about preventive measures, and Marcus found himself mentally critiquing the expert's recommendations before he caught himself and looked away. 10 years earlier, he would have been that expert. Probably a better one. Marcus Andrew Webb had not always been a man who fixed computers and worked night security at industrial parks. He had been in another lifetime one of the most respected security training specialists on the East Coast. His position with Port Authority Boston had involved designing and implementing training programs for security personnel across multiple facilities, teaching everything from threat recognition to crisis de-escalation to physical intervention techniques. He had consulted with corporate clients on executive protection protocols, testified as an expert witness in criminal trials involving security failures, and published peer-reviewed articles on the psychology of violent behavior in public spaces. His specialty had been reading people, understanding the subtle cues of body language, facial expression, and behavioral patterns that distinguished ordinary citizens from potential threats. He could identify a concealed weapon from the way a person walked, detect deception in the micro-expressions that flickered across a face during conversation, predict violent intent from patterns of movement that most observers would dismiss as unremarkable. The gift for that was how his colleagues described it, had emerged early in his career during a routine training exercise that had gone unexpectedly live. A disgruntled former employee had attempted to enter a secure facility with a weapon, and Marcus, then a junior trainer observing the exercise, had recognized the threat before anyone else in the room. His intervention had prevented a tragedy, and his reputation had been established in that moment of instinctive action. The years that followed had built on that foundation. Marcus developed training methodologies that became industry standards techniques for identifying and neutralizing threats that were adopted by security organizations across the country. He traveled extensively conferences in Chicago, consulting gigs in Los Angeles, training sessions in Miami, building a career that seemed destined for continued ascent. Then he met Rachel Henderson at a medical conference in Providence, where he was presenting on hospital security protocols. She was a third-year resident at Massachusetts General attending a session on emergency room violence prevention, and she asked a question during his presentation that demonstrated both intelligence and practical experience that most of his audiences lacked. He found her afterward at the coffee station, and their conversation lasted through the lunch break and into the afternoon sessions that neither of them attended. Rachel changed everything. Not immediately, the transformation happened gradually over months of long-distance phone calls and weekend visits that grew longer and more frequent. But Marcus began to recognize something important about the career he had built. It was consuming him. The constant travel, the immersion in human violence and its prevention, the hypervigilance that served him professionally but made ordinary social interactions exhausting. All of it was slowly eroding the parts of himself that Rachel seemed to value most. They married 18 months after their first meeting, and Emma arrived 2 years after that. For a while, Marcus maintained both his career and his family, juggling training schedules around Rachel's hospital shifts, coordinating childcare through an elaborate network of babysitters and grandparents and daycare facilities. But the strain was evident. He missed Emma's first steps because he was in Seattle teaching corporate executives about workplace violence prevention. He missed her first words because he was stuck in an airport in Denver flights, grounded by a snowstorm that seemed personally designed to punish his choices. Rachel never complained, not directly. But Marcus saw the weariness in her eyes when he returned from yet another trip, the resignation when he explained that the Houston conference couldn't be rescheduled, the quiet sadness when Emma asked why Daddy wasn't home again. They were building a life together, but Marcus was rarely there to live it. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 years and 4 months before the incident at a megamart. Emma was 5 years old, and Rachel had just finished a brutal shift in the emergency room, gunshot wound, car accident, heart attack, the usual parade of human mortality that defined her profession. She found Marcus in the living room, packing for a flight to Atlanta the following morning. Her words emerged with a calm that suggested she had rehearsed them many times. "I need you to choose, Marcus. I'm not asking you to give up your career forever. But right now, at this moment in our lives, I need you to be here. Emma needs you to be here. And I can't keep doing this alone." Marcus had looked at his suitcase half-packed with the equipment and materials that had defined his professional identity for over a decade, and then at his wife, and then at the photographs on the mantle showing the family he had helped create, but was slowly losing to his dedication to work. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't really a choice at all. He resigned from Port Authority the following month. The exit was amicable, his superiors understood, offered references, and the promise that his position would be waiting if he ever changed his mind. Marcus found it contract work through a friend of Rachel's brother, transitioning his technical skills into a field that offered predictable hours and minimal travel. The salary cut was significant, but Rachel's income as an attending physician had grown substantially, and together they managed. For 2 years, they managed beautifully. Marcus was home for bedtimes and school plays and Saturday morning pancakes. He coached Emma's t-ball team, attended parent-teacher conferences, built a treehouse in the backyard that became the envy of the neighborhood children. Rachel worked brutal hours, but she came home to a household that functioned smoothly because Marcus had made it his mission to ensure she never had to worry about anything beyond her patients. They were happy, genuinely uncomplicated, boringly happy. Then Rachel drove home from an overnight shift on a January morning when the roads should have been clear, but weren't, and a truck driver who had been awake for 37 hours straight lost control on a patch of black ice, and Marcus Webb became a single father to a 5-year-old girl who didn't understand why mommy wasn't coming home anymore. The first year after Rachel's death existed in Marcus's memory as a blur of grief and logistics. He remembered the funeral, though specific details had faded. The church where they had been married, transformed into a space for mourning rows of colleagues and friends and family members whose condolences blended into an undifferentiated mass of sympathetic murmurs. He remembered Emma's face at the graveside, her small hand gripping his with a desperation that suggested she feared he might disappear too if she let go. He remembered returning to an empty house that still smelled like Rachel's perfume, still held her clothing in the closet, still expected her key in the door at the end of each day. The panic attacks began approximately 6 weeks after the funeral. The first one struck without warning during a mundane Sunday afternoon when Marcus was sorting Rachel's belongings for donation. He had been holding one of her sweaters, the green cashmere she wore on their first date, still carrying traces of her scent when his heart suddenly accelerated to a rate that seemed incompatible with human survival. His lungs refused to accept air. The walls of the bedroom seemed to contract inward, crushing him in a space that grew smaller with each desperate attempt to breathe. He collapsed in the hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom, gasping and sweating, and absolutely certain that he was dying, that he would leave Emma orphaned in a house where both her parents had abandoned her. Emma found him there. She had been watching cartoons in the living room, her attention drawn by the unfamiliar sounds of her father's distress. Marcus expected screaming tears, the terrified response of a child confronted with a parent's vulnerability. Instead, Emma walked to him, calmly knelt beside his shaking form, and placed her small hand over his heart. Her voice carried a steadiness that seemed impossible for a 5-year-old. "Feel my breathing, Daddy. Slow like mine." She breathed with exaggerated deliberation, in through the nose, out through the mouth. And Marcus found himself matching her rhythm despite the chaos consuming his nervous system. Slowly and possibly, the panic began to recede. His heart rate declined, his lungs remembered how to function. The walls returned to their proper positions. When he could finally speak, Marcus asked his daughter where she had learned to do that. Emma's response was simple. "Mommy told me." She said, "Sometimes people get scared and forget how to breathe, and you have to help them remember." Rachel, Marcus thought. Even from beyond death, his wife was still taking care of them. The panic attacks continued over the following months, less frequently, less severely, but still present as unwelcome reminders of the trauma that had reshaped their lives. Marcus learned to recognize the warning signs, developed coping strategies, found ways to manage the episodes without alarming Emma. But the aftermath of each attack left him depleted, fragile, in ways that his professional training had never prepared him to address. The red bracelet appeared 3 months after that first episode. Emma presented it to him after dinner one evening, her expression solemn with the importance of the gesture. The bracelet was constructed from yarn, red yarn, braided in an uneven pattern that spoke to learning fingers and developing fine motor skills. It was not beautiful by any conventional standard. The braiding was irregular, the yarn showed signs of having been tied and retied multiple times, and the finished product barely fit around Marcus's wrist. It was the most precious object he had ever received. Emma explained its purpose with the gravity of a child imparting sacred knowledge. "When you get scared, Daddy, touch the red string and remember to breathe. I made it so you stay calm. Red is the color of courage and love." Marcus had not removed the bracelet since that evening. It had accompanied him through 3 years of grief and recovery, through hundreds of IAT service calls, and dozens of night security shifts, through moments of despair and unexpected joy. The yarn had faded from bright crimson to a softer rose worn smooth by constant contact with his skin, but the bracelet remained a talisman of his daughter's love and his own commitment to surviving for her sake. He touched it now, sitting in the dental office waiting room, as the news segment about corporate kidnapping gave way to a weather report promising clear skies for the weekend. The gesture had become automatic, a habitual check-in with the most important relationship in his life. The yarn felt rough against his fingertips, grounding him in the present moment, reminding him of the choices he had made and the responsibilities he had accepted. The security career was over. The expertise he had spent years developing now served only to make him uncomfortable in crowded spaces, hyper-aware of threats that other people remained blissfully ignorant of. He noticed the unattended backpack near the dental office reception desk, a potential IED. His training whispered, though common sense recognized it as the property of the hygienist who had arrived late to her shift. He tracked the movements of every person who entered the waiting room, cataloging their clothing and behavior patterns in a mental database that served no practical purpose. Old habits, Marcus thought. Useless skills for a useless man. But the habits remained embedded in neural pathways that refused to atrophy despite 3 years of disuse. And in less than 30 hours, those habits would save Diana Ashford's life. The memory that haunted Marcus most frequently was not Rachel's death or its immediate aftermath, but a moment from their final conversation, the last words they exchanged before she left for the hospital shift from which she would never return. It had been an ordinary Tuesday evening. Emma was asleep, her homework completed, and approved her bath given, and pajamas donned with the efficiency that characterized their nightly routine. Marcus was standing at the kitchen counter reviewing the family budget on his laptop, while Rachel gathered her materials for the overnight shift. They had been discussing vacation plans, a possible trip to the Cape in August, dependent on Rachel's schedule and their financial situation. Rachel paused at the kitchen door, her medical bag over one shoulder, and looked at Marcus with an expression he hadn't understood at the time, but had analyzed endlessly since. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Marcus looked up from his spreadsheet. "For what?" "For being here. For making this house into a home while I'm gone. For everything you gave up so that Emma could have a father who's actually present." The words carried weight, more weight than the casual gratitude of their daily interactions. Marcus should have recognized it, should have set aside his budget analysis and given his wife the attention her tone suggested she needed. Instead, he smiled, accepted the thanks, and returned his attention to the columns of numbers on his screen. "Drive safe," he said. "Text me when you get there." Rachel nodded. "I love you, Marcus." "Love you too." She left. Marcus finished his budget review, checked on Emma, and went to bed expecting to wake to Rachel's return. Instead, he woke to a phone call from the state police informing him that his wife had been killed in a collision on I-93 and asking him to come to Massachusetts General, the hospital, where she had dedicated her career to saving lives, to identify her body. The final conversation replayed in Marcus's mind during quiet moments, each repetition amplifying his guilt at not having been more present, more attentive, more aware of what he was about to lose. Rachel had been saying goodbye, he realized later. Not consciously, she had no way of knowing what the next few hours would bring, but something in her had recognized the importance of that moment and had tried to mark it with gratitude and love. And Marcus had responded with half his attention, the other half devoted to household finances that now seemed monumentally insignificant. The guilt was irrational, his therapist had explained during the brief period when he attended counseling sessions. Nothing Marcus said or did in that kitchen could have prevented the accident. Rachel's death was the result of external factors entirely beyond his control. Icy roads, a fatigued truck driver, the random cruelty of circumstance. But rationality provided limited comfort in the dark hours of the night when Marcus lay awake replaying that final conversation and imagining how differently it might have gone if he had known what was coming. He would have set aside the laptop. He would have crossed the kitchen and taken Rachel in his arms. He would have held her for longer than the casual embrace of routine partnership, memorizing the warmth of her body and the scent of her hair and the particular way she fit against him. He would have told her with the gravity such words deserved that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that his life before her had been successful, but empty, and his life with her had been transformed into something worth living. He would have made those final moments count. Instead, he had said, "Love you too," without looking up from his spreadsheet, and those were the last words Rachel Webb ever heard from her husband. The guilt was Marcus's constant companion now. As familiar as the red bracelet on his wrist, it colored his interactions with Emma, making him hyper-attentive to every moment they shared, determined never to repeat the mistake of taking precious time for granted. It influenced his career choices, reinforcing his commitment to work that allowed him to be present rather than successful. It shaped his entire approach to living, transforming each ordinary day into an opportunity to demonstrate the attention and gratitude he had failed to show Rachel when it mattered most. Some days the guilt felt like a blessing, a motivator that kept him focused on what truly mattered. Other days it felt like a prison sentence, trapping him in patterns of self-punishment that no amount of present moment awareness could absolve. Today, the Thursday before Megamart, fell somewhere in between. Marcus finished his work at the dental office, resolving the server issue with routine competence, and drove to his next assignment, a law firm in downtown Boston with a printer that refused to communicate with their network. The work occupied his hands and the surface level of his attention, while his deeper thoughts dwelt on Emma and their planned trip to Megamart and the small bear that would serve as reward for her academic achievements. The bear was a trivial thing, a stuffed animal that would cost perhaps $15 and would likely be forgotten within a year. But to Emma, it represented something more significant, a promise kept, a reward earned, a demonstration that her father's words meant something. Marcus had learned in the years since Rachel's death that such demonstrations mattered more than he had ever understood. Children measured love in concrete actions rather than abstract declarations. They remembered not what you said, but what you did not, the promises you made, but the promises you kept. The small bear was not just a stuffed animal. It was evidence that Emma could trust her father to follow through, to prioritize her small joys, despite the pressures of adult responsibility. Marcus would have walked through fire to deliver that evidence. As it happened, he would walk through something considerably more dangerous, though he didn't know it yet, driving through Boston traffic with his mind on bears and budgets and the ordinary concerns of ordinary life. The night security work began at 8 o'clock 3 evenings a week when Emma stayed with her grandparents. Robert and Carol Henderson had been Rachel's parents, and they had embraced their role as emergency support system for Marcus and Emma with the determined love of grandparents who understood that their son-in-law was struggling to hold his family together. Robert was a retired civil engineer with the methodical temperament that profession suggested. He approached problems systematically, breaking complex challenges into manageable components and addressing each in turn. Carol possessed the emotional intelligence that Robert lacked, reading situations and people with an intuition that Marcus had come to rely upon during his darkest moments. They lived in Quincy, 20 minutes from Marcus's house, in the same rambling Victorian where Rachel had grown up. Emma adored visiting them. The house contained treasures accumulated over decades of family life, and Carol had preserved Rachel's childhood bedroom essentially intact, creating a space where Emma could feel connected to the mother she barely remembered. Thursday evenings were not scheduled grandparent nights, but Marcus had confirmation that tomorrow, Friday, Emma would spend the hours between his workday and their shopping trip at the Henderson home. Carol would pick her up from school, feed her an early dinner, and have her ready when Marcus arrived to collect her for their Megamart expedition. The arrangement was one of dozens that constituted the informal support network, keeping Marcus's life functional. He had learned in the years since Rachel's death that asking for help was not weakness, but necessity, that single parenthood required resources beyond what any one person could provide. The night security job had emerged from similar necessity. 6 months after Rachel's death, Marcus had conducted a ruthless assessment of his financial situation and concluded that his IT contract income alone would not sustain the life he wanted for Emma. The savings account that had once represented security had been depleted by funeral costs, medical bills that insurance hadn't fully covered, and the accumulated expenses of maintaining a household during a period when Marcus had been too grief-stricken to pay attention to such details. Options were limited. He could increase his IT hours, which would require sacrificing time with Emma. He could seek a higher-paying position, which would likely involve the travel and unpredictability he had specifically abandoned. Or he could find supplementary work during the hours when Emma was already cared for by others. The night security position at Harborside Industrial Park materialized through a contact from Marcus's previous career, a former colleague who now managed security for a commercial real estate company and was looking for reliable overnight coverage. The work involved walking patrol routes, monitoring camera feeds, and responding to the occasional false alarm triggered by wandering cats or malfunctioning sensors. It was tedious, unglamorous, and paid modestly. It was also perfect for Marcus's purposes. 3 nights a week while Emma slept at her grandparents' house, Marcus earned additional income without sacrificing a single moment of the time he had committed to being present for his daughter. The arrangement had continued for 2.5 years, becoming as integral to his routine as brushing his teeth or brewing morning coffee. The industrial park itself occupied former shipping facilities along Boston Harbor, converted into a complex of warehouses, light manufacturing spaces, and distribution centers. Marcus knew every corner of the property: the loading dock where homeless individuals occasionally sought shelter, the fence gap that teenagers used to access the waterfront, the camera blind spots that would concern a more security-conscious management company, but that Marcus had learned to compensate for through modified patrol patterns. His co-workers at the industrial park knew him as a quiet, competent professional who kept to himself and never complained about assignments. His supervisor, a retired Boston PD detective named Dave Martinez, had recognized Marcus's background training within days of his hiring. "You've had real security experience," Dave had observed during Marcus's second week. "The way you move, the way you check rooms. This isn't your first rodeo." Marcus had acknowledged the observation without elaborating. "I did some work in the field a while back. Different life." Dave had the wisdom not to push further. The security industry was full of people with complicated pasts, former military, former law enforcement, former intelligence, former everything. A man who had clearly been something more than an IT contractor didn't require explanation, only the reliable performance of his assigned duties. Marcus provided that performance unfailingly, earning Dave's trust and the comfortable anonymity of being one professional among many doing unglamorous work for modest compensation. The industrial park would miss his coverage on Friday evening when Marcus had arranged for another guard to take his shift so he could spend the evening with Emma. Dave had approved the substitution without question. Marcus rarely requested schedule changes, and his accumulated credibility permitted the occasional deviation from routine. Friday would be for Emma, for Megamart and the small bear, and the ordinary magic of fulfilling a promise to a child who had learned too young that promises weren't always kept. Friday would be the most important day of Marcus Webb's life, though he had no way of knowing it yet, sitting at the counter of a Boston diner, eating a sandwich and reviewing his schedule for the upcoming weekend. The connection to Ashford Medical Technologies had been brief and unmemorable, at least from the perspective of anyone who worked in that gleaming tower of corporate ambition. 6 months before the Megamart incident, Marcus had received an IT contract assignment that sent him to AMT's Boston headquarters for a 2-week period. The job involved upgrading network infrastructure on the executive floor, replacing outdated routers, reconfiguring security protocols, ensuring that the company's digital communications met current standards for data protection. It was routine work, the kind of assignment Marcus could complete in his sleep. He arrived each morning through the service entrance, changed into his work uniform, in a basement storage room, and spent his days crawling under desks and behind server racks, while the important people of AMT conducted their important business around him. He was furniture, less than furniture. The executives who populated the top 5 floors of the building looked through him rather than at him, their attention reserved for colleagues of appropriate status. Marcus found the treatment familiar, if not comfortable. Corporate environments consistently devalued the people who kept them functioning, and he had long since stopped expecting acknowledgement for competent work. The first encounter with Diana Ashford occurred on his 3rd day at AMT. He had been summoned to the CEO's suite to address a connectivity issue that was disrupting a video conference with European investors. The call came through Marcus's supervisor with the urgency that characterized all executive requests. Whatever Diana Ashford wanted, Diana Ashford got immediately, regardless of what tasks might be interrupted in the process. Marcus arrived at the 38th floor to find the CEO standing in the center of her office, barking instructions at a trembling assistant while a laptop displayed the frozen image of confused-looking men in expensive suits. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I'm in the middle of a presentation that affects the entire European expansion, and our technology decides to stop working. What exactly am I paying our IT department for?" The assistant, a young woman who looked like she had been hired primarily for her ability to absorb verbal abuse, gestured toward Marcus. "The technician is here now. Ms. Ashford, he'll have it fixed immediately." Diana Ashford turned toward Marcus with the expression of someone examining an appliance that had failed to meet expectations. Her assessment took perhaps 2 seconds and apparently found him wanting. "Well, what are you waiting for? Fix it." Marcus moved to the laptop without responding, his professional composure unaffected by her tone. The issue was immediately apparent. The video conferencing software had crashed, a common occurrence with the outdated version AMT was running. He restarted the application, verified the connection, and stepped back to indicate completion. "It should work now. The software version you're running is 3 years old. I can schedule an update for tonight that will prevent similar issues in the future." Diana had already turned back to her screen, dismissing Marcus from her awareness before he finished speaking. "Fine. Do whatever you need to do. Just make sure it doesn't happen again during business hours." Marcus gathered his toolkit and moved toward the door, pausing when his equipment cart inadvertently brushed against the corner of an antique side table near the office entrance. The contact was minimal, the table undamaged, but Diana's reaction was immediate and disproportionate. Be careful, that table is worth more than your entire annual salary. If you damage anything in this office, you'll be paying it off for the rest of your career. The words carried a casual cruelty that Marcus recognized from years of observing how people with power treated those without it. Diana Ashford had not considered whether her statement was accurate, necessary, or kind. She had simply expressed the contempt she felt for someone she perceived as existing beneath her notice. Marcus left the office without responding. Engaging with that kind of behavior served no purpose. It would not change Diana's perspective and would only provide her with additional opportunities for dismissive superiority. But as he walked toward the elevator, he heard Diana speaking to her assistant in a voice intended to be private, but clearly audible in the quiet corridor. Make sure they send someone competent next time. I don't have time to deal with slow IT support people who don't understand the importance of what we're doing here. The characterization was inaccurate. Marcus had resolved the issue within 90 seconds of entering her office, but accuracy was clearly not Diana's concern. She needed someone to blame for the disruption to her important meeting, and the IT contractor represented a convenient target. Marcus touched the red bracelet beneath his sleeve, a habitual gesture that reminded him of what actually mattered, and continued toward the basement where his equipment waited for the next assignment. The interaction with Diana Ashford was not unusual. Marcus had experienced similar treatment from executives throughout his career. People who confused professional status with human worth, who believed that their importance exempted them from basic courtesy toward others. Such people existed in every organization, and the only practical response was to perform one's job competently and avoid becoming invested in their opinions. But something about AMT nagged at Marcus during his remaining days at the company, something beyond the ordinary arrogance of corporate leadership. His security training remained active despite 3 years of disuse, and that training was flagging inconsistencies throughout the building. Doors that should have been secured were propped open. Security cameras had obvious blind spots that compromised coverage of sensitive areas. Employees wore identification badges in public spaces, making them easily identifiable as AMT personnel and potential targets for social engineering attacks. Most concerning was the complete absence of executive protection protocols. Diana Ashford moved through the building and the surrounding neighborhood with no security detail, no apparent awareness of threat potential, no procedures for ensuring her safety during public appearances. She was the CEO of a company developing cutting-edge medical technology that would be valuable to competitors, to foreign intelligence services, to criminal organizations willing to pay for intellectual property theft. She was a target, and nobody at AMT seemed to recognize or care about that vulnerability. Marcus's training demanded that he address the deficiency. 3 years of IT work had not erased the instincts that had made him one of the most respected security specialists on the East Coast, and those instincts screamed warnings that he could not ignore. Over the course of his 2-week assignment, Marcus documented every security flaw he observed. He photographed improperly secured doors, mapped camera coverage gaps, noted the patterns of executive movement that would allow a skilled adversary to predict Diana Ashford's location at any given time. He compiled his observations into a comprehensive report, 47 pages of detailed analysis with specific recommendations for addressing each identified vulnerability. The report went far beyond his IT contract responsibilities. Nobody had asked him to evaluate AMT's security posture, and he would receive no compensation for the hours he spent creating the document. But Marcus could not ignore what he had seen, could not walk away from a dangerous situation without at least attempting to communicate its severity. He submitted the report to AMT's Human Resources Department on his final day at the company, requesting that it be forwarded to the appropriate security personnel. The HR representative, a pleasant young man who clearly had no understanding of security matters, assured Marcus that the document would reach the right people. 1 week later, Marcus received an email from Diana Ashford's assistant. The message was brief and dismissive. Your report has been reviewed by Ms. Ashford and relevant department heads. The recommendations have been determined to be unnecessary and cost prohibitive given the current risk assessment. Your IT contract has been completed satisfactorily. Thank you for your service to Ashford Medical Technologies. That was it. 47 pages of detailed security analysis, dismissed in 4 sentences. Marcus read the email twice, then deleted it and returned his attention to his current IT assignment, a network issue at a veterinary clinic in Somerville. The rejection was disappointing but not surprising. Companies ignored security recommendations, constantly preferring to believe that bad things happen to other organizations rather than investing in prevention measures that seemed abstract and expensive. Diana Ashford had decided that his concerns were not worth addressing. That was her prerogative as CEO, and Marcus had neither the authority nor the inclination to force the issue. He moved on. New contracts, new clients, new problems to solve. AMT faded into the background of his professional memory, one assignment among dozens that blurred together in the undifferentiated routine of IT support work. 6 months later, he would save Diana Ashford's life using skills she had dismissed as unnecessary and observations she had rejected as paranoid. The irony was not lost on him. Friday arrived with the golden quality of autumn light that made New England spectacular during the brief weeks between summer heat and winter gray. Marcus woke at his usual time, completed his usual routine, and delivered Emma to the school bus with the usual exchange of promises about their evening plans. The small bear remained the focus of Emma's anticipation. She had mentioned it 3 times during breakfast, confirming that their trip to Megamart was still scheduled, verifying that her academic performance had indeed earned the promised reward. His workday proceeded without notable incident. Morning assignments at an insurance brokerage, afternoon calls at a real estate office. The accumulated tedium of troubleshooting technology problems created by people who didn't understand the systems they used daily. Marcus moved through the work with mechanical efficiency, his attention partially devoted to professional tasks and partially to anticipating the evening ahead. At 4:15, he arrived at the Henderson home to collect Emma. Carol met him at the door with the knowing smile of a grandmother who understood exactly how important the evening's activities were to her granddaughter. She's been talking about that bear since she got here. You'd think we were going to Disney World instead of the supermarket. Marcus smiled in return. The build-up is half the fun. How was she today? Perfect as always. Did her homework without being asked, helped me make cookies, told me all about her math test. Carol's expression softened with the particular tenderness she reserved for conversations about her granddaughter. She's thriving, Marcus. Whatever you're doing, it's working. She's thriving because she has grandparents who love her. Marcus stepped inside to find Emma. I can't take credit for that. You can take credit for being present, for putting her first. Rachel would be proud of the father you have become. The words struck Marcus with unexpected force, loosening something in his chest that he usually kept tightly controlled. Thank you, Carol. That means more than you know. Emma appeared from the kitchen, cookies in hand, her backpack already strapped in place. Her expression combined the excitement of a child anticipating a treat with the studied casualness of an 8-year-old who didn't want to appear too eager. I'm ready, Daddy. I brought cookies for the car. Did you leave any for Grandma and Grandpa? Most of them. Grandma said these were my share. Carol confirmed this with a nod. Chocolate chip with extra chocolate chips as requested. Don't ruin your dinner, young lady. Emma's response suggested that dinner was a distant concern compared to the immediate pleasure of car cookies and shopping trip anticipation. The drive to Megamart took 23 minutes through light Friday evening traffic. Emma provided running commentary on her day, the math test. She had aced the art project. She had started the social dynamics of third-grade friendships that required constant navigation. Marcus listened with genuine attention, filing away details that would inform future conversations and decisions. His daughter was growing up. The baby he had held in the hospital, the toddler who had taken her first steps in their living room, the kindergartner who had clung to him on the first day of school, all of those earlier versions of Emma were becoming distant memories, replaced by this increasingly complex person who had opinions about everything and the vocabulary to express them. The transformation was bittersweet. Marcus treasured each stage of Emma's development while simultaneously mourning the stages that had passed. Rachel should have been here to witness this, should have been the one listening to stories about math tests and art projects in the complicated social lives of 8-year-olds. Instead, there was only Marcus doing his inadequate best to fill the space that Rachel's absence had created. Megamart materialized on the horizon, a sprawling retail complex surrounded by acres of parking and anchored by the distinctive red and white signage that had made the chain ubiquitous across suburban America. Marcus found a spot near the entrance, helped Emma from her booster seat, and locked the car with the automatic gesture of routine. "Remember our rules," he said, taking Emma's hand as they approached the entrance. "Stay with you. Don't talk to strangers. Keep my hands on the cart or on you." "Perfect. And what's first on our list?" Emma consulted the piece of paper she had been clutching since leaving school, the shopping list she had written herself in careful blue crayon letters. Milk, then bread, then small bear. Marcus noticed that small bear had been underlined 3 times, presumably to emphasize its importance relative to the mundane dairy and bakery items that preceded it. "Then let's get started." They entered Megamart together, transitioning from the October twilight into the perpetual fluorescent noon of American retail. The store hummed with Friday evening activity, families stocking up for the weekend, couples debating dinner options, solitary shoppers navigating the aisles with the focused efficiency of people who had better things to do. Marcus grabbed a cart, lifted Emma into the child seat, and pointed the vessel toward the dairy section. He did not know that Diana Ashford was already in the store selecting wine for a dinner party she would never host. He did not know that 2 men with military training and criminal intent had followed her from her office, waiting for the optimal moment to execute their plan. He did not know that his life was approximately 17 minutes away from changing in ways he could not imagine. He knew only that his daughter was happy, that the small bear was waiting somewhere in the toy section, and that this evening, this ordinary Friday evening, was exactly the kind of moment he had sacrificed his career to experience. That knowledge was enough. The progression toward the dairy section took Marcus and Emma past the store's central thoroughfare, a wide aisle that connected the entrance to the back wall and served as the primary artery for customer traffic. Marcus maneuvered their cart with the absent efficiency of someone who had navigated this particular megamart dozens of times, dodging children and avoiding collision with shoppers who had stopped mid-aisle to consult shopping lists or argue about brand preferences. Emma maintained a running commentary on everything they passed: the Halloween displays that had appeared with October, the arrangement of seasonal produce, the woman whose cart contained an improbable quantity of cat food. "Maybe she has a lot of cats, Daddy." "Maybe, or maybe she's stocking up. Why would anyone need that much cat food?" "Some people buy in bulk. It's cheaper that way." Emma processed this information with visible skepticism. "I think she has a lot of cats." They acquired milk from the dairy section, the store brand, not the premium organic option that Rachel had preferred, and proceeded toward the bread aisle. Marcus was comparing nutritional labels on whole wheat options when his attention was first drawn to the 2 men. The recognition happened below conscious awareness, triggered by patterns his training had identified before his rational mind engaged. The men were not shopping. Their movements tracked something specific, their attention focused not on merchandise but on a target that Marcus's current angle prevented him from identifying. He watched them for approximately 30 seconds, maintaining the pretense of bread selection while his peripheral vision cataloged details. Mid-30s, physically fit, coordinated movement patterns suggesting professional training. One wore a dark jacket despite the store's warm interior, the kind of jacket that could conceal a weapon. Both maintained communication through subtle gestures, head nods, hand signals, the unspoken language of people who had trained together. Military, Marcus assessed, or law enforcement, or private security turned criminal. Whatever they were, they weren't here to shop. Marcus's first instinct was to create distance, to steer his cart away from whatever situation was developing and ensure Emma remained safe from potential violence. His daughter was his responsibility, his only responsibility, and engaging with unknown threats contradicted every decision he had made since Rachel's death. But instinct demanded additional information. The trained part of his mind, the part he had tried to suppress for 3 years, needed to understand what was happening before he could determine the appropriate response. "Sweetheart, stay right here with our cart for 1 minute. Daddy needs to check something." Emma looked up from the bread selection. "What kind of something?" "Just something. Don't move from this spot, okay? Is something wrong?" The question, delivered with the intuition of a child who had learned to read her father's moods, forced Marcus to choose his words carefully. "I'm not sure yet. That's what I need to find out. Will you be my brave girl and wait right here?" Emma nodded, her expression settling into the determined seriousness that she adopted when Marcus invoked their shared vocabulary of courage and responsibility. I can be brave. I know you can, sweetheart. Marcus moved toward the end of the bread aisle, positioning himself to observe the two men while remaining partially concealed behind an end-cap display of seasonal cookies. From this angle, he could see their target, Diana Ashford. The recognition struck him with surprising force. 6 months had passed since his contract work at AMT, but he remembered her face, the sharp features, the professional posture, the aura of authority that surrounded her even during a simple task like selecting wine. She was dressed less formally than he had seen her at the office, but the essential quality of her presence remained unchanged. She had no idea what was approaching. The two men were closing in now, their coordination precise enough to suggest extensive planning. One would approach from the front, the other from behind, the classic pincer movement designed to eliminate escape routes before the target recognized the threat. The timing was calculated to intercept Diana as she reached for a bottle of champagne, her attention focused on the selection rather than her surroundings. Marcus could identify this moment for what it was: the final seconds before a kidnapping attempt. His mind raced through options. Alert store security, but they were nowhere visible, probably dealing with a shoplifting incident in another department. Call 911, but response time would be measured in minutes and the situation would resolve itself in seconds. Intervene physically, but that meant risking Emma abandoning his commitment to avoid exactly this kind of engagement. And then the taller man adjusted his jacket, and Marcus glimpsed what was hidden beneath a utility knife, small and retractable, but entirely capable of threatening violence. Diana Ashford was about to be taken at knife point in front of dozens of witnesses who would do nothing to help, and the only person present with the training and positioning to intervene was Marcus Webb, the IT contractor, whose security recommendations she had dismissed 6 months earlier. The irony was not lost on him, but it was irrelevant to the decision that needed to be made in the next few seconds. He returned to Emma, his movements controlled to avoid attracting attention. Sweetheart, I need you to do something very important. Emma's eyes were wide now, sensing the gravity in her father's tone. Like a mission. Marcus managed to smile despite the tension coiling in his chest. Exactly like a mission. I need you to stay right here with the cart and count all the red things you can see around you. Don't move until I come back. But what about our groceries? This is more important than groceries right now. Can you be my brave girl? Emma nodded with the solemnity of a soldier receiving orders. I can count really high, Daddy. I know you can, sweetheart. Marcus positioned the cart near a display of paper products, partial concealment from the wine aisle while maintaining his visual contact with Emma. He knelt beside his daughter and looked directly into her blue eyes. Stay right here. Remember our rule about strangers. Don't talk to them. And if anyone tries to make me go somewhere, scream really loud. That's my smart girl. He kissed her forehead, touched the red bracelet on his wrist, and moved toward the wine section. The walk took perhaps 15 seconds, but Marcus experienced it as a series of distinct observations rather than continuous motion. He cataloged the store layout, identifying resources and obstacles. Glass bottles that could serve as weapons or projectiles. Slick floors that could cause falls. Narrow aisles that limited movement but created choke points. The growing crowd of oblivious shoppers who might become collateral damage if the situation escalated. He approached from an angle that allowed him to maintain visual contact with both Emma and the developing confrontation, timing his movement to arrive at the wine section just as the attackers reached their target. The taller man struck first. He pressed against Diana's left side, his body blocking her escape, while his partner moved to cover the opposite direction. Marcus heard the low command, saw Diana's expression shift from confusion to terror, watched the champagne bottle slip from her fingers and shatter against the floor. The sound of breaking glass rippled through the nearby shoppers, drawing attention to the tableau. Most turned away immediately, recognizing danger and choosing avoidance over engagement. A few pulled out phones to record rather than to call for help. Diana's plea for assistance went unanswered. Marcus observed the shorter attacker more closely now, something nagging at the edge of his recognition. The man's movement patterns, his posture, the particular way he scanned his environment while maintaining control of the situation. Marcus had seen these specific mannerisms before. The realization struck like cold water. Tyler Brennan. 7 years ago, when Marcus was still teaching crisis management and threat recognition for Port Authority, Tyler Brennan had been one of his most promising students. Young, intelligent, physically capable, and possessed of the kind of situational awareness that couldn't be taught, only recognized and developed. Marcus remembered evaluating him, highly recommending him for advanced training, believing that Tyler would become an excellent security professional. They had shared lunches during training sessions, conversations about family and career aspirations. Tyler had shown Marcus photos of his wife and newborn son, describing his plans to provide them with the security and stability that his own childhood had lacked. He had been earnest in a way that Marcus found refreshing, genuinely committed to using his skills for protection rather than aggression. What had happened to transform that promising young professional into someone willing to kidnap a corporate executive at knife point? The recognition complicated everything. Tyler Brennan was not a common criminal, but a trained specialist, someone who understood exactly the techniques that Marcus might employ to stop him. The advantage of surprise was diminished when your opponent had studied from the same manual. But Marcus also knew Tyler's weaknesses. 7 years ago, during their final evaluation, Marcus had noted that Tyler was excellent at planning and execution, but became vulnerable when confronted with unexpected variables. His strength was following protocols. His weakness was adapting when protocols failed. Marcus had approximately 5 seconds to decide whether to intervene. His daughter was 20 feet away, counting red objects and trusting him to return safely. His training screamed contradictory impulses: protect Emma versus prevent violence versus avoid engagement versus do something. The attackers were moving Diana toward the service corridor, now using the crowd's passivity as cover for their operation. If Marcus did nothing, Diana Ashford would disappear into that corridor and likely never be seen alive again. The corporate espionage angle was obvious to anyone with security training. AMT's medical technology was worth billions, and Diana possessed access codes and proprietary knowledge that would be valuable to competitors willing to employ criminal methods. If Marcus intervened, he risked everything he had built since Rachel's death: injury exposure, the possibility that Emma would witness her father being hurt, or worse. The decision crystallized in the span of a single heartbeat. Marcus could not stand by while a woman was abducted in front of his child. Whatever Diana Ashford had done to him, whatever disrespect she had shown, she did not deserve to be kidnapped. And Emma did not deserve to grow up believing that her father would turn away from someone in need. Some lessons could only be taught by example. Marcus moved. The first action was designed to create chaos rather than inflict damage. He grabbed a large bottle of orange soda from a nearby display, chosen for its pressurized contents and bright coloring, and shook it vigorously while his thumb worked the cap loose. The action took perhaps 2 seconds, during which the attackers remained focused on Diana and their exit route. The soda erupted in a fountain of carbonated liquid, and artificial coloring aimed directly at the taller attacker's face. The effect was immediate and disabling. The man released Diana to claw at his burning eyes, his knife clattering to the floor as his body prioritized defending against the chemical assault. Tyler spun toward the source of the attack, his trained reflexes recognizing the threat even before his conscious mind processed what was happening. The recognition hit at the same moment. Cole Marcus, Cole. The use of his name, even with the surname wrong, confirmed that Tyler remembered him. Marcus used the moment of hesitation to push his shopping cart forward with explosive force, the metal frame connecting with the blinded attacker's midsection and sending him sprawling across the wet floor. Bottles toppled from the wine display, adding broken glass to the hazardous terrain. Diana had dropped to the floor, either from Marcus's shouted command or simple survival instinct. Either way, she was out of the immediate danger zone. Tyler recovered from his surprise and advanced with the controlled aggression of someone who had extensive hand-to-hand training. His first punch was fast and technically precise, exactly the kind of strike Marcus had taught students to execute during his years at Port Authority. Marcus twisted to avoid the blow, but wasn't quite fast enough. Tyler's fist connected with his ribcage, pain flaring through his midsection with an intensity that suggested possible fracture. The impact staggered Marcus backward, his foot slipping in the spreading pool of soda and wine. For a moment, doubt flooded his consciousness. He was 3 years out of practice, his body weakened by grief and irregular meals and the accumulated stress of single parenthood. Tyler was younger, stronger, and clearly still maintaining the physical conditioning that Marcus had let lapse. He might fail. He might be beaten in front of his daughter, might leave Emma traumatized by the sight of her father bloody and defeated on a supermarket floor. Then he heard Emma's voice from across the store, high and clear with concern. "Daddy, are you okay?" The words centered him like nothing else could. His daughter was watching. His daughter needed him to succeed. His daughter would learn from whatever happened in the next few seconds lessons that would shape her understanding of courage and responsibility for the rest of her life. Marcus touched the red bracelet through his sleeve, felt the rough texture of Emma's handiwork against his skin. Breathe, think, adapt. Tyler was approaching again, confident from the successful strike, his guard slightly lowered in anticipation of an easy follow-up. The floor was treacherous with mixed liquids. The wine display behind Marcus offered both obstacles and opportunities. The crowd had stepped back, creating a roughly circular arena around the combatants. Marcus let his body sag more than the injury warranted, exaggerating his vulnerability to draw Tyler closer. When his former student stepped forward to deliver what he clearly expected to be a decisive blow, Marcus dropped low and executed a leg sweep, a technique that Tyler had never fully mastered during their training sessions together. Tyler went down hard, his head striking the edge of a lower shelf with a sound that made several onlookers gasp. The blow was not hard enough to cause serious injury. Marcus had calibrated it precisely to disorient rather than incapacitate, but it created the opening he needed. The taller attacker was recovering now, wiping soda from his eyes while searching for his dropped knife. Marcus grabbed the mop bucket from a nearby cleaning station, industrial-gray plastic containing several gallons of soapy water, and upended it in the man's path. The combination of soap water and already slick flooring created a surface essentially impossible to navigate. The attacker's feet went out from under him immediately, his body crashing down with the uncontrolled impact of someone denied all traction. Marcus was on him before he could recover, using the rough brown paper towels from a nearby dispenser to create makeshift restraints around the man's wrists. Not permanent, the paper would tear eventually, but sufficient to control him for the duration this situation required. Tyler was struggling to rise, still dazed from his impact with the shelving unit. Marcus turned to address him, calculating the risk of approaching versus maintaining distance. The calculation became irrelevant when an older man stepped out of the crowd and placed a booted foot firmly on Tyler's chest. "Stay down, son. You've made enough bad decisions today." The voice carried the unmistakable authority of military command. The man was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the weathered features of someone who had spent decades in demanding environments. His posture suggested extensive physical training despite his age, and his eyes assessed the situation with the professional detachment of a veteran operator. Marcus met the man's gaze, recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who had spent their life preparing for exactly this kind of moment and had chosen to act rather than observe. The older man nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging Marcus's contribution while maintaining pressure on Tyler's chest. "Nice work, Marine. Almost medical disqualification." "Close enough. I'm Hank." "Marcus." "Pleasure. Let's make sure these gentlemen stay comfortable until the authorities arrive." The conversation was brief and efficient, conducted in the shorthand of people who understood crisis situations and each other's capabilities. Marcus secured the taller attacker's restraints, while Hank kept Tyler immobilized through simple positional control. Total elapsed time from Marcus's intervention to both attackers being neutralized: 43 seconds. The silence that followed held a dreamlike quality. Shoppers who had observed the entire confrontation stood in stunned immobility, their phones still recording video that would soon flood social media platforms. Store employees emerged from various hiding spots, their expressions combining relief with the awkward realization that they had contributed nothing to the resolution. And Diana Ashford remained crouched behind the wine display, her expensive dress ruined by mixed liquids, her professional composure shattered by the trauma of the past minute. Emma's voice cut through the silence with innocent clarity. "Daddy, did you win?" Marcus turned toward his daughter, who had maintained her position by the paper products, despite the chaos that had erupted around her. She was still holding her shopping list, still sitting in the cart, still trusting that her father would return safely from whatever mission had called him away. He moved toward her immediately, ignoring the pain in his ribs and the trembling that was beginning in his hands as adrenaline levels declined. We all won, sweetheart. The bad men can't hurt anyone now. He lifted her from the cart and held her against his chest, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck, with the fierce grip of a child who had been frightened but refused to show it. You were very brave, Emma said. I counted 47 red things while you were gone. That's a lot of red things. Did you stay exactly where I told you? Yes, but I was scared. Being scared is okay. Being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Like what you just did. Marcus considered the question. He had acted on instinct, on training that he had tried to bury for 3 years, on a moral imperative that wouldn't allow him to stand by while someone was victimized. Whether that constituted bravery or foolishness was a question he couldn't answer. I did what I thought was right. That's all any of us can do. Security guards finally materialized from wherever they had been hiding, followed moments later by police officers responding to the multiple 911 calls that witnesses had eventually made. The scene transformed from a crisis site into a crime scene with yellow tape and evidence markers and official personnel asking questions that Marcus answered with the concise professionalism of someone who had spent years on the other side of such investigations. He provided his statement to a detective who seemed mildly incredulous at the detailed observations on Marcus offered the timeline of events, the positioning of attackers, the techniques they had employed. He handed over his phone, which contained photographs he had taken of the two men before their assault timestamps, proving that he had identified them as threats well before they acted. You documented them before anything happened. The detective's tone suggested he was reassessing his initial evaluation of the witness. Old habits. I used to work in security. Used to different life. The detective had the wisdom not to push further, accepting the photographs in the statement and the physical evidence without demanding explanations for how an IT contractor had acquired the skills to neutralize two trained attackers using supermarket supplies. Diana Ashford was being attended by paramedics when Marcus finally looked in her direction. She sat on a folding chair someone had produced wrapped in a foil blanket. Despite the store's warm temperature, her face pale beneath smeared makeup. Her eyes found his across the chaos of police activity and evidence collection. Recognition flickered in her expression, the dawning awareness that she knew this man, that their paths had crossed before under very different circumstances. You worked at my company, she said, her voice hoarse from the ordeal. I had support, about 6 months ago. Contract work, network infrastructure on the executive floor. Diana's face cycled through emotions, confusion, recognition, something that might have been shame. I remember, I wasn't very kind to you. The understatement hung between them, laden with the memory of her dismissive treatment and the cruel words she had spoken within his hearing. Marcus could have reminded her of specific incidents, the comment about her table being worth more than his salary, the criticism of his competence that she had delivered to her assistant. But such reminders served no purpose in the present moment. You were having a difficult day. Everyone has difficult days. The generosity of the response seemed to strike Diana more forcefully than accusation would have. Her eyes filled with tears. Not just the trauma response of the kidnapping attempt, but something deeper. Some recognition of the contrast between her treatment of this man and his willingness to risk his life on her behalf. Before either could speak further, Hank Morrison approached with the confident stride of someone who had spent decades walking into difficult situations. Hell of a thing you did there, he said to Marcus, extending a hand that bore the calluses of a lifetime of physical work. Haven't seen civilian intervention that clean since I left the service. You've had training. Some not as current as it should be. Current enough. Hank produced a business card from his wallet. I run a security consulting firm, mostly corporate clients, training, risk assessment, that kind of thing. Could use someone with your instincts. Marcus accepted the card without commitment. I appreciate the offer, but my schedule's pretty tight with my daughter. Hank nodded, glancing toward Emma, who was now engaged in conversation with a female police officer who had been assigned to distract her from the grimmer aspects of the investigation. Family comes first. That's why all my contractors set their own hours. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Think about it. World needs more men who can do what you just did. The paramedics had moved from Diana to Marcus, now examining his ribs with professional concern. You need x-rays, one of them said. Possible fracture. Just bruised. I've had worse. At least let us wrap them. Marcus submitted to the bandaging, watching as police led the two attackers, now conscious and thoroughly subdued, toward waiting patrol cars. Tyler Brennan's eyes met his briefly during the procession, and Marcus saw something complicated in that gaze, shame perhaps, or the recognition of how far he had fallen from the promising young professional who had once sat in Marcus's training sessions. Questions would need answering about Tyler. What had transformed him from dedicated security specialist to criminal conspirator? What circumstances had led him to this supermarket, this crime, this confrontation with his former instructor? But those questions belong to investigators and prosecutors. Marcus's immediate responsibility was waiting by the paper towel display, clutching her shopping list and watching her father with wide, worried eyes. He crossed to Emma as soon as the paramedics finished their work. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Emma held up the shopping list. Her blue crayon letters still enumerated their original items. Milk bread, small bear, but beneath them in fresh writing that must have been added during the chaos, she had written two additional words: "Daddy is brave." Marcus's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. He knelt beside his daughter and pulled her into a gentle embrace, careful of his bandaged ribs, but desperate for the physical connection that confirmed they had both survived. "I love you, Emma. I love you too, Daddy. Can we still get my bear?" Despite everything, the violence, the fear, the pain radiating from his injured side, Marcus laughed. "Yes, sweetheart, we can still get your bear." The store manager appeared, offering apologies and discounts and anything else that might prevent litigation. Marcus accepted none of it except permission to complete their shopping. He had promised Emma a bear, and that promise would be kept regardless of circumstances. They found the toy section together, Emma still in the cart, because Marcus didn't trust his bruised body to maintain walking pace while holding her hand. The stuffed animals occupied a long shelf near the back of the store, plush companions in every imaginable species and size. Emma considered the options with the gravity of someone making a consequential decision. "That one," she said, finally pointing to a small brown bear with a red bow around its neck. "Because red is the color of courage and love." Marcus looked at the red bow, then at the matching bracelet on his wrist, and understood that his daughter had just taught him something about symbols and meaning that no professional training had ever conveyed. He purchased the bear along with their original list items, the milk they had selected, before chaos erupted, the bread they had been examining, when Marcus first spotted the threat. The total came to $47.32, charged to a debit card that would require careful management for the rest of the month. It was, Marcus reflected, money well spent. They left Megamart as the sun was setting over suburban Boston, painting the parking lot in shades of amber and gold. The police had released them with instructions to remain available for additional questioning, and the store manager had pressed his personal card into Marcus's hand with repeated assurances that anything the Webb family needed would be provided at no charge. Marcus helped Emma into her car seat, secured the brown bear in her arms, and stood for a moment beside the driver's door. His ribs ached. His hands were still trembling from adrenaline aftermath. His mind was processing the implications of what had just occurred, the return of skills he had tried to abandon, the confrontation with Diana Ashford, the recognition of Tyler Brennan, the uncertain future that stretched before him now that his carefully constructed invisible life had been shattered. But his daughter was safe. His promise had been kept. And somewhere in the chaos of the past hour, something had shifted inside Marcus Webb. Something that had been dormant since Rachel's death, suppressed by grief and responsibility, and the deliberate choice to pursue invisibility rather than significance. He didn't have a name for it yet, wouldn't have one for some time. But as he drove home through the darkening streets of suburban Massachusetts, his daughter singing quietly to her new bear, in the back seat, Marcus felt something that had been absent from his emotional landscape for 3 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of the grieving, the hope that somehow the loss could be undone or the pain could be eliminated. This was different. This was the hope of someone who had been reminded that they were capable of making a difference, that their skills and instincts still functioned, that the world still contained opportunities for action rather than mere survival. He didn't know that videos of his intervention were already spreading across social media platforms. He didn't know that #CalmDad would be trending within 12 hours, that news organizations would be camped on his lawn by morning, that Diana Ashford and her corporate empire would soon be demanding audiences with the man who had saved her life. He knew only that Emma was safe, that the bear had been acquired, and that somewhere in the wreckage of a supermarket wine section, Marcus Webb had begun to find his way back to the person he had been before tragedy taught him to hide. The drive home took 27 minutes. Emma fell asleep before they reached the highway, her new bear clutched against her chest, her face peaceful with the untroubled rest of childhood. Marcus drove carefully, adjusting his movements to accommodate his injured ribs, his mind wandering through the events of the evening and their potential consequences. His phone had been buzzing constantly since they left the store, calls and messages from numbers he didn't recognize, presumably reporters or other media personnel who had somehow acquired his contact information. He had silenced the device after the third call, unwilling to deal with questions while his daughter needed his attention. Those questions would demand answers eventually. The world would want to know how an IT contractor had developed the skills to neutralize two trained attackers in a supermarket. They would want to understand his connection to Diana Ashford, his history with Tyler Brennan, his motivations for intervention rather than avoidance. Marcus would provide whatever explanations seemed appropriate when the time came. But tonight was for Emma, for maintaining whatever normalcy could be salvaged from an evening that had veered so dramatically from their intended simple shopping trip. He carried his sleeping daughter into their house, navigating the familiar path from garage to bedroom with the ease of countless repetitions. Emma stirred slightly as he laid her on her bed, her eyes opening just enough to confirm her surroundings. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe. Is the bear okay?" Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion and pain. "The bear is perfect, just like you." Emma's eyes closed again, her breathing settling into the deep rhythm of genuine sleep. Marcus stood beside her bed for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall, memorizing the piece of her expression, feeling the weight of everything that could have gone wrong, pressing against his bruised ribs. His daughter had witnessed violence tonight. She had seen her father engaged in physical combat with dangerous men, had watched from across a supermarket, while outcomes hung uncertain. The memory would stay with her. Psychologists would probably recommend some form of counseling to process the trauma. But Marcus knew something that the experts might overlook. Emma had also witnessed her father protecting someone in need. She had seen him take action when others stood passive, had watched him succeed through skill and courage, rather than luck or external rescue. The lessons embedded in that witnessing would compete with whatever fear or anxiety the experience had generated. If Marcus had to choose which lesson would prove more lasting, he would bet on the positive. Children learn from example more than instruction, absorb values from observation more than explanation. Emma's mom had spent 3 years watching her father prioritize responsibility and presence. Tonight she had seen him demonstrate that those qualities extended beyond their small household to include strangers in danger. That was not a bad lesson to carry forward. Marcus kissed his daughter's forehead, adjusted her blanket, and retreated to the living room. The house felt different somehow. Smaller and larger, simultaneously familiar, yet strange. He had been in combat less than 2 hours ago, had faced threats he had specifically avoided for 3 years, had rediscovered capabilities that his grief counselor had encouraged him to release as part of moving forward. But moving forward, Marcus was beginning to understand, didn't mean abandoning everything from the past. It meant integrating experience rather than amputating it, carrying lessons learned rather than pretending they had never been taught. Rachel would have understood. She had always been better than Marcus at accepting the complexity of human development, the way growth incorporated rather than replaced earlier versions of self. Her medical training had taught her that healing was not a return to a previous state, but an adaptation to a new reality, scar tissue that was different from original skin, but served its purpose nonetheless. Marcus was scarred. By Rachel's death, by the years of grief, by the deliberate constriction of his life into patterns designed for safety rather than significance. But those scars had not eliminated his capacity for action. Tonight had proven that the man he had been before tragedy still existed beneath the protective layers he had accumulated. He didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The old career was impossible to resurrect. His life was built around Emma now, around its schedules and priorities that precluded the unpredictability of professional security work. But perhaps there was some middle ground, some way to utilize his skills without abandoning his commitments. Hank Morrison's business card was still in his pocket. Security consulting with flexible hours. A man who understood that family came first. It was something to consider. Not tonight when exhaustion and injury demanded rest, but soon when the immediate chaos had settled and the longer-term implications became clear. For now, Marcus poured himself a small measure of whiskey, the bottle Rachel had bought for his birthday the year before she died, still mostly full because he rarely drank, and settled into the recliner that faced the dark window. His reflection looked back at him from the glass superimposed over the shadowed backyard. A man in his mid-30s, worn but functional, scarred, but not broken. The red bracelet circled his wrist, visible even in the dim light from the kitchen. When you get scared, Daddy touched the red string and remembered to breathe. He had been scared tonight, terrified really in those moments when the outcome remained uncertain and Emma's safety depended on his success. But he had touched the red string and remembered to breathe and done what needed doing. Perhaps that was all anyone could ask of themselves. Not the elimination of fear, but the courage to act despite it. Not perfection, but persistence. Not the absence of scars, but the willingness to keep functioning regardless. Marcus finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. Tomorrow would bring complications. Media attention, police follow-up, the inevitable questions about what had happened and why. Diana Ashford would probably reach out through corporate channels expressing gratitude that would ring hollow, given her previous treatment. Tyler Brennan would begin the legal process that would eventually reveal whatever circumstances had transformed him from promising professional to criminal. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight, Marcus's daughter slept safely in her bed, clutching a bear with a red bow around its neck. Tonight, the house remained warm and secure around them. Tonight, despite everything, they had completed their shopping list. Milk, bread, small bear. Daddy is brave. Marcus smiled in the darkness, touched the red bracelet one final time, and allowed exhaustion to finally claim him. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Tonight they had won. The morning after Megamart arrived with helicopter rotors beating against the gray October sky. Marcus woke to the sound at 6:14 1 minute before his usual alarm, his body registering the unfamiliar noise as potential threat before his conscious mind processed its meaning. He moved to the bedroom window with the careful steps of someone whose ribs protested every motion, pulling aside the curtain to reveal a scene that belonged in a different life entirely. 3 news vans occupied the street in front of his house, their satellite dishes extended toward the overcast heavens, like technological flowers seeking electronic sunlight. Reporters clustered on the sidewalk with microphones and cameras, their breath visible in the cold morning air, as they rehearsed stand-ups and checked equipment. A helicopter bearing the logo of a Boston news station circled overhead, its camera presumably capturing aerial footage of the modest ranch house where the grocery store hero had retreated after his unlikely victory. His phone displayed 47 missed calls from numbers he did not recognize, 217 text messages from contacts ranging from former colleagues to distant relatives who had apparently seen the news coverage, and an email inbox so overwhelmed that the notification simply read 99 plus, without attempting to enumerate the actual total. The hashtag had already achieved cultural penetration. Marcus discovered this when he made the mistake of checking social media during his first cup of coffee, scrolling through an endless cascade of posts celebrating hashtag CalmDad and analyzing every frame of the multiple videos that had captured his intervention. Amateur investigators had already identified both attackers from facial recognition. Databases had connected Tyler Brennan to his previous security career, had discovered Marcus's own professional history through archived Port Authority press releases. The narrative being constructed bore only partial resemblance to reality. According to the emerging consensus, Marcus Webb was a former elite security operative who had abandoned his career after personal tragedy, living in humble obscurity until fate placed him in position to save a corporate titan from professional kidnappers. The story contained enough truth to be recognizable and enough embellishment to be compelling, transforming a complicated situation into the kind of simple morality tale that social media consumed voraciously. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway while Marcus was contemplating the siege outside their windows, her expression combining curiosity with the particular wariness of a child who sensed adult anxiety. "Why are there people on our lawn, Daddy?" The question demanded an answer that Marcus had not yet formulated. How did one explain viral fame to an 8-year-old? How did one contextualize the transformation from anonymous citizen to public figure in terms of a third grader could comprehend? They want to talk to me about what happened at the store last night, but we're not going to talk to them right now. Are they going to stay there forever? No, sweetheart. They'll get bored eventually and find something else to be interested in. Emma processed this information with her characteristic gravity, then offered a solution with the straightforward logic of childhood. Maybe if you talk to them once they would go away faster. The suggestion contained more wisdom than Marcus wanted to acknowledge. His instinct was to retreat to wait out the attention to resume invisible life as soon as the news cycle moved on. But Emma was right that engagement might accelerate the timeline. One interview carefully controlled could satisfy the public appetite while establishing boundaries that subsequent requests would have to respect. He called his in-laws first, explaining the situation and arranging for Emma to spend the day at their house while he managed the circus that had materialized overnight. Carol's voice carried equal parts concern and practical determination as she confirmed that Robert would drive over immediately to collect Emma through the back alley that connected their properties to the next street. The extraction proceeded without incident, Emma departing with her backpack and her new bear, and a kiss from her father that lingered longer than usual. Marcus watched from the back window as Robert's sedan disappeared around the corner, carrying his daughter to safety, while he remained behind to address the consequences of heroism. His second call went to Hank Morrison, whose business card had survived the night in Marcus's wallet despite everything that followed. The older man answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the alert quality of someone who had been awake and monitoring the situation. Figured you'd call. Saw the news this morning. Hell of a circus outside your place. I need advice on managing this. You mentioned experience with unwanted attention. More than I'd like. Listen, here's what we're going to do. One interview, neutral location, your terms. I know a producer at National Morning who owes me a favor. She's fair, professional, won't try to ambush you. We control the questions, set time limits, and make clear this is the only statement you're providing. And after that, you issue a polite request for privacy and let me handle anyone who doesn't respect it. I've got friends who are very good at making persistent reporters reconsider their career choices. The interview was arranged for that afternoon at a hotel conference room in Cambridge, chosen for its neutrality and its distance from Marcus's besieged home. The reporter Diane Chen, a veteran journalist whose reputation for fairness Hank had verified through multiple sources, agreed to parameters that protected Emma and Rachel from becoming part of the story. Marcus spent the intervening hours reviewing the narrative he wanted to present, anticipating questions, and formulating responses that revealed enough to satisfy curiosity while concealing the details he needed to protect. The exercise felt familiar, despite years of disuse echoing the media training he had conducted for corporate clients during his previous career. The interview itself proved less grueling than anticipated. Diane Chen asked intelligent questions about Marcus's security background, his assessment of the situation at Megamart, his decision-making process during the intervention. She respected the boundaries around personal topics, focusing instead on the professional aspects that made the story newsworthy. Her final question cut closer to the emotional core than her previous queries. Many people are calling you a hero. How do you respond to that characterization? Marcus considered the question, aware that his answer would be quoted and analyzed and debated across countless platforms. Hero gets overused. I was someone with specific training who recognized a dangerous situation and had the skills to intervene safely. I'd hope anyone with similar capabilities would make the same choice. But mostly I was a father who didn't want his daughter to witness violence without seeing someone try to stop it. The response became a soundbite that circulated widely in the following days, extracted from context, but retaining its essential meaning. Marcus Webb had not sought attention or accolades. He had simply done what he believed was right, motivated primarily by the lessons he wanted his daughter to learn from his example. The strategy worked as Hank had promised. Having obtained their official statement, most media outlets moved on to analyzing the corporate angles, AMT's security failures, Diana Ashford's rejected security assessment, the questions of institutional arrogance that the incident had exposed. The human interest story of the heroic single father gradually yielded to investigations of corporate malfeasance and the criminal conspiracy that had targeted one of Boston's most prominent executives. By Monday morning, the news vans had departed from Marcus's street, replaced by the ordinary quiet of suburban routine. Emma returned home, the bear came with her, and life resumed something approximating its previous pattern. But the old pattern no longer fit the new circumstances. Ashford Medical Technologies made contact through official channels 2 days after the interview aired. Catherine Shaw, identified in the email as Chief Security Officer, requested a meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest relating to the incident and its aftermath. Marcus recognized the corporate language for what it was, an overture that would include some combination of gratitude, liability management, and recruitment. Companies did not reach out to civilians who had intervened in crimes against their executives without strategic motivation underlying the gesture. He agreed to the meeting primarily out of curiosity, scheduling it for Thursday morning at AMT headquarters. The building that had once represented a minor contract assignment now loomed with different significance, its glass and steel facade reflecting the complications that had entered Marcus's life. Catherine Shaw proved to be precisely what her title suggested, a professional security specialist in her mid-40s, her gray-streaked hair arranged in a practical style that suggested someone who valued efficiency over appearance. She met Marcus in the lobby, rather than sending an assistant shaking his hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to environments where such gestures carried meaning. Her office occupied the 35th floor, 3 levels below the executive suite, where Marcus had once repaired Diana Ashford's video conferencing software. The view encompassed Boston Harbor and the city skyline, a panorama that spoke to the status her position commanded within the organization. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Webb. I imagine you have had quite a week." "Interesting would be an understatement. Your email mentioned matters of mutual interest." Catherine gestured toward a chair across from her desk, settling into her own seat with the deliberate movements of someone preparing to deliver a rehearsed presentation. "Before we discuss the board's proposal, I want you to see something." She pushed a thick folder across the desk, Marcus's security assessment from 6 months earlier, the 47 pages he had compiled during his IT contract. But the document now bore extensive annotations in red ink margin notes that had clearly been added recently. "I read your report after the Megamart incident. Every vulnerability you identified, every recommendation you made, it was all correct. If Ms. Ashford had implemented your suggestions, the kidnapping attempt would have been significantly more difficult to execute, possibly impossible. The report was rejected as unnecessary and cost prohibitive." "It was, and I've spent the past week investigating why." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "The decision to dismiss your recommendations didn't originate with Ms. Ashford alone. Someone in the organization actively advocated against implementation, arguing that the expense wasn't justified by the risk assessment. The information aligned with suspicions Marcus had not yet articulated, even to himself. Security failures of the magnitude he had observed at AMT rarely occurred through simple negligence. Someone had ensured that the vulnerabilities remained unaddressed, creating the conditions that made the kidnapping attempt viable. You're suggesting an insider threat." "I'm suggesting that the attack on Ms. Ashford may have had assistance from within this organization. Someone who knew her schedule, her habits, the gaps in our security coverage." Catherine's gaze held Marcus's steadily. "Which brings me to the board's proposal." The offer she presented exceeded anything Marcus had anticipated. The position of special security consultant carried a salary nearly triple his current combined income, with flexible hours designed to accommodate his responsibilities to Emma. He would report to both the CEO and the board with authority to evaluate and restructure AMT's security protocols across all facilities. Additionally, and separate from the employment offer, the board had established an educational trust for Emma, full funding from elementary school through college graduation, regardless of whether Marcus accepted the consulting position. "The trust is not contingent on your decision about the job. It's acknowledgement of what you did, completely independent of any ongoing relationship with the company." Marcus studied the documents Catherine had provided, processing the implications of what he was being offered. The financial security was transformative, an end to the careful budgeting that had defined his life since Rachel's death, the elimination of worry about Emma's future educational expenses. But the timing and magnitude of the offer suggested motivations beyond simple gratitude. "The board is concerned about public perception. The story of how Ms. Ashford treated me during my contract has become part of the narrative. This offer serves as damage control." Catherine did not deny the assessment. Partially, the stock price dropped 7% in the days following Megamart, and our partners are asking questions about corporate culture. Having you on board demonstrates that we recognize talent regardless of how it was previously treated. Ooh, she paused, allowing honesty to enter her tone. But it's also because we genuinely need your expertise. The insider threat I mentioned, I don't have the resources or the perspective to investigate it properly. You do. You want me to find the person who helped arrange the attack on your CEO. I want you to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. If that requires identifying internal conspirators, then yes, that's part of the scope. The conversation continued for another hour, exploring details of authority and access that would accompany the position. Marcus asked questions designed to probe for hidden conditions or constraints, finding none that substantially altered the fundamental nature of the offer. When he finally departed AMT headquarters, the documents in his briefcase represented a potential transformation of everything he had built since Rachel's death. The careful, invisible life he had constructed could give way to something larger, a return to meaningful work in his field of expertise, financial security, for Emma's future, the opportunity to prevent violence rather than merely responding to it. But such a transformation carried risks he had specifically avoided for 3 years. Engagement with the corporate world meant exposure visibility, the possibility of threats that might extend to his daughter. The insider threat that Catherine had described suggested enemies within AMT who had already demonstrated willingness to employ violence. Marcus needed more information before making his decision, and the most important source of that information was currently sitting in Suffolk County Jail, awaiting trial for attempted kidnapping and assault. The interview with Tyler Brennan required coordination with multiple bureaucracies, the district attorney's office, the jail administration, Tyler's public defender. Marcus presented himself as a potential witness with information relevant to the defense, a characterization that contained enough truth to survive scrutiny while concealing his actual purpose. The meeting room at Suffolk County Jail embodied institutional functionality: gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor with chairs on either side. Marcus waited alone, having declined the offer of a corrections officer's presence, until the door opened and Tyler Brennan shuffled in, wearing orange jumpsuit and wrist restraints. 7 years had not been kind to Marcus's former student. The eager young professional who had once discussed family aspirations over training session lunches now presented the hollowed appearance of someone who had exhausted their reserves of hope. Weight loss had sharpened his features into something almost skeletal, and the shadows beneath his eyes spoke to sleepless nights spent contemplating the destruction of everything he had valued. Tyler's recognition of Marcus produced a complex expression: shame, resignation, and something that might have been relief at seeing a familiar face from his previous life. "Instructor Cole, figured you might show up eventually. I go by Webb now, different life." "Yeah." Tyler's laugh carried no humor. "I know about different lives." They sat across from each other, the metal table forming a boundary between present circumstances and shared history. Marcus had prepared questions, strategies for extracting information, but the desperation in Tyler's eyes suggested that elaborate technique would be unnecessary. "Tell me what happened, Tyler. How did you get from Port Authority training sessions to kidnapping executives in supermarkets?" The story that emerged over the following hour constituted a tragedy of American desperation, the kind of narrative that never made headlines because it was too common to qualify as news. 3 years earlier, Tyler's son had been diagnosed with leukemia. The treatment costs exceeded insurance coverage by hundreds of thousands of dollars, accumulating with each round of chemotherapy and each hospital stay. Tyler had depleted his savings, mortgaged his house, borrowed from every source available, and still the bills continued growing. Then the recession hit. The security company where Tyler worked implemented layoffs, and his position was eliminated despite his exemplary record. Unemployment benefits covered a fraction of their expenses. The medical bills became collection notices, then legal judgments, then the threat of losing everything they had left. You know what it's like watching your kid go through that, knowing that every treatment might be his last because you can't afford to keep paying. Tyler's voice cracked but continued. "I would have done anything to save him. Anything." The recruiters had found him at his lowest point, strangers who knew everything about his situation, his skills, his desperation. They offered money enough to clear all debts and fund the remaining treatment, All he had to do was use the training he had received to accomplish one task. They knew exactly how to approach me, had files on my finances, my son's medical records, everything. It was like they had been waiting for someone like me to reach the breaking point. Who were they? I never got real names. Everything went through encrypted channels, anonymous payments. But they weren't just criminals. They were too sophisticated, too well-informed. They knew things about AMT's internal operations that random outsiders wouldn't have access to. Marcus leaned forward slightly, recognizing the confirmation of Catherine Shaw's suspicions. You're saying someone inside Ashford Medical was providing information to the people who hired you? Had to be. They knew Ashford's schedule weeks in advance, knew which security measures were active and which were just theater, knew exactly when and where she would be vulnerable. Tyler met Marcus's gaze with the haunted eyes of someone who had stopped caring about self-preservation. The kidnapping wasn't just about grabbing a CEO. They wanted access to AMT's technology, sure, but they also wanted information about the board of directors. Something about internal power struggles. Can you give me anything concrete? Names, locations, communication records. I saved everything I could. Email addresses, payment receipts, instructions they sent. It's all on an encrypted drive that my lawyer has. I was going to use it for a plea bargain, but Tyler's expression shifted towards something resembling the determined professional Marcus remembered from years ago. If you're trying to protect people at AMT, take it. Figure out who's really behind this. Maybe I can't undo what I did, but I can at least help stop whatever they're planning next. The meeting concluded with arrangements for Tyler's lawyer to transfer the encrypted files to Marcus. As guards arrived to escort Tyler back to his cell, the former student paused at the door. My son is responding to treatment. The money paid for what he needed. The words carried no pride, only the exhausted acknowledgement of impossible choices. I know that doesn't excuse anything. But when you're standing where I stood, looking at your kid's face and knowing you're the only thing between him and death, you find out what you're capable of. Marcus remained in the interview room and after Tyler's departure processing the implications of what he had learned. The conspiracy extended beyond criminal opportunism into the heart of AMT itself. Someone with authority and access had orchestrated conditions that nearly resulted in Diana Ashford's kidnapping, and that person remained in position to attempt something similar again. The job offer from Catherine Shaw took on new dimensions in light of Tyler's revelations. Marcus would not merely be implementing security protocols, he would be hunting a traitor who had already demonstrated willingness to employ violence against corporate leadership. The stakes had escalated beyond anything he had anticipated when he walked into Megamart seeking milk bread and a small stuffed bear. Diana Ashford's personal request for a meeting arrived through unofficial channels, a text message to Marcus's phone from a number she must have obtained through considerable effort. The coffee shop she suggested occupied a quiet corner of Cambridge, far from the glass towers of corporate Boston. Marcus arrived to find her already seated, and the transformation from their previous encounters struck him immediately. Gone was the power suit and intimidating presence that had defined Diana Ashford in his experience. The woman waiting at a corner table wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, and an expression that suggested vulnerability rather than authority. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the trauma she had survived and the reckoning it had forced upon her. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Your text said you wanted to talk as the person who was saved, not as the CEO. That intrigued me. Diana's hands wrapped around her coffee cup with the nervous energy of someone unaccustomed to situations they could not control. I've been replaying that night constantly. The moment when I realized what was happening, when I called for help and everyone looked away. Her voice carried the rawness of recent trauma. Do you know what I saw on their faces' satisfaction? They were glad to see me in trouble. Someone even said I deserved it. I heard her comment. And then there was you, the man I had insulted, whose recommendations I had dismissed, who had every reason to walk past and pretend he hadn't noticed. Diana's eyes met his with an intensity that suggested she had been building toward this moment for days. Why did you help me? Marcus considered the question, aware that his answer mattered to Diana in ways that extended beyond simple curiosity. Because you needed help. Because my daughter was watching. Because the kind of man I want to be doesn't calculate whether someone deserves rescue before deciding to act. Even though I was terrible to you, even though I treated you like furniture, you were rude to someone you considered beneath your notice. That's not admirable, but it doesn't merit being kidnapped at knife point. Diana absorbed this response, her expression cycling through emotions that Marcus recognized from his own journey through grief and self-examination. The board has given me an ultimatum. Demonstrate meaningful change in my leadership approach by the end of the quarter, or step down as CEO. The admission emerged with difficulty, each word representing a surrender of the control she had spent her career accumulating. Their right to demand it. I've been so focused on results that I forgot the people producing them were actually people. And you're telling me this because I need help, not corporate assistance or professional consultation. I need someone who will tell me the truth about myself without worrying about consequences. Someone who has seen both the worst of who I've been and apparently believes I'm worth saving anyway. The request represented something Marcus had not anticipated. Diana Ashford was not merely seeking to repair corporate damage or improve public perception. She was asking for genuine assistance with personal transformation, acknowledging flaws that her previous self would never have admitted it existed. I'm considering the security position Catherine offered, but my priority is my daughter. Any work I do has to accommodate her schedule, her needs, her safety. Of course, those terms aren't negotiable. They're the foundation of everything else. Diana leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking for a friend, Marcus. I'm asking for an honest mirror. Someone who will tell me when I'm falling back into old patterns, who isn't afraid to call me out when I treat people poorly. That's a significant ask from someone who dismissed my expertise 6 months ago. I know, and I know I haven't earned the right to ask anything of you. Diana's voice dropped to something approaching a whisper. But I'm trying to become someone worthy of the second chance you gave me at Megamart. I can't do it alone, and I don't trust anyone else to tell me the truth. Marcus studied the woman across the table, applying years of training in reading people to assess her sincerity. The Diana Ashford he had encountered during his IT contract would have been incapable of this conversation, her armor too thick, her self-image too dependent on control and superiority. The trauma of Megamart had cracked that armor, allowing something more human to emerge from beneath. I'll think about it, but I need you to understand something first. He waited until her eyes met his before continuing. If I take this position, I won't protect your feelings. When you're wrong, I'll say so. When you're falling back into old patterns, I'll call it out. And if you can't handle that honesty, we'll both know this arrangement isn't working. That's exactly what I need. Then we'll talk again after I've reviewed everything and made my decision. They parted with a handshake that felt different from their previous professional contact, charged with possibility rather than hierarchy, acknowledging a relationship that had been transformed by violence into something neither had anticipated. The evidence Tyler had compiled arrived 2 days later, delivered by his public defender with appropriate chains of custody documentation. Marcus spent an evening reviewing encrypted files while Emma slept in the next room, his security training reawakening as patterns emerged from the data. The conspiracy was more sophisticated than he had initially estimated. The people who had recruited Tyler operated through multiple layers of intermediaries, their communications routed through servers in jurisdictions beyond American legal reach. But Tyler had been meticulous in his documentation, preserving metadata and transaction records that revealed connections despite the operational security employed by his handlers. 3 individuals within AMT appeared repeatedly in the patterns Marcus identified. Jonathan Pierce, Vice President of Business Development, whose correspondence showed suspicious timing relative to security decisions that affected Diana's vulnerability. Richard Caldwell, a long-serving board member who had opposed Diana's appointment as CEO and continued to undermine her authority through procedural challenges. Victoria Chen, the CFO, whose budget decisions had consistently restricted security spending despite documented threats. One name emerged as the most likely primary conspirator. Pierce's investment portfolio, which Marcus traced through publicly available financial disclosures, showed significant positions in companies that competed directly with AMT's medical technology initiatives. If Diana Ashford were removed and the company weakened by scandal, those investments would appreciate substantially. The motive was straightforward: corporate greed wrapped in layers of professional rivalry and personal resentment. Pierce had apparently concluded that eliminating Diana through criminal means was more efficient than competing against her legitimately. Marcus compiled his analysis into a report that would eventually reach Catherine Shaw and the board, but the immediate implications demanded action before the quarterly deadline that would determine Diana's future. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number as he finished his preliminary assessment. The message contained no sender identification, only stark warning. Board meeting Monday. Pierce will present fabricated evidence against Ashford. She'll be terminated and potentially prosecuted. Act now or lose everything. Marcus stared at the anonymous warning, recognizing that the game had escalated beyond security consulting into active corporate warfare. Someone within AMT knew what Pierce was planning and had chosen to alert an outsider rather than risk internal channels that might be compromised. The stakes had grown beyond protecting Diana Ashford from physical danger. Now her career, her reputation, and possibly her freedom depended on exposing Pierce before he could execute whatever plan he had developed. Marcus touched the red bracelet on his wrist, feeling the rough texture of Emma's handiwork. 3 years ago, he had abandoned his career to be present for his daughter. Now circumstances were demanding that he re-engage with exactly the kind of dangerous complexity he had specifically avoided. But Emma had also taught him something about courage, that being brave meant doing the right thing even when it was frightening, that protecting people sometimes required accepting risks you would prefer to avoid. He picked up his phone and called Catherine Shaw. "We need to meet tonight. I have information about who arranged the attack on Diana, and I think they're planning something worse." The conspiracy would be exposed. The evidence would be presented, the confrontation would come. But first, Marcus needed to ensure that when the board meeting arrived on Monday, he would be ready to protect Diana Ashford from enemies within her own organization, enemies who had already demonstrated that they were willing to do anything to destroy her. The night before the board meeting found Marcus in Catherine Shaw's office at 11:40, surrounded by evidence that would either save Diana Ashford or destroy them all. The security chief had cleared her schedule and dismissed her staff, creating a sealed environment where sensitive information could be discussed without risk of interception. The documents spread across her conference table represented weeks of investigation compressed into hours of desperate analysis, patterns emerging from data that Pierce had assumed would never be connected. Catherine stood at the window, her reflection ghostly against the nighttime cityscape of Boston Harbor. "If we're wrong about this, we both lose our careers. You understand that?" Marcus did not look up from the financial records he was cross-referencing. "If we're right and do nothing, Diana loses considerably more than her career. Pierce has already demonstrated willingness to employ violence. There's no reason to believe he'll stop at professional destruction." When the investigation had consumed the previous 72 hours, Marcus and Catherine, working in parallel tracks that converged on the same conclusion. Tyler Brennan's encrypted files had provided the foundation, but the structure built upon that foundation required additional evidence that only someone with Catherine's internal access could obtain. Pierce's communications showed careful attention to operational security, but perfect concealment was impossible in a corporate environment where everything generated records. His calendar showed meetings with individuals who had no legitimate business relationship with AMT. His expense reports included travel to cities where AMT had no operations, but where competing medical technology firms maintained headquarters. His investment portfolio, disclosed in regulatory filings, revealed positions that would benefit enormously from Diana's removal and AMT's subsequent decline. The pattern was circumstantial but compelling. Pierce had spent years positioning himself to profit from the company's destruction while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. The board meeting is in 9 hours. Pierce will present whatever fabricated evidence he's prepared, and the other members will vote based on incomplete information. Catherine turned from the window, her expression hardened by the reality of corporate warfare. "We need something definitive, something that proves intent rather than just suspicious patterns." Marcus had been considering this problem throughout the investigation, and the solution had presented itself in Tyler Brennan's most detailed documentation. Pierce communicated with Tyler's handlers through encrypted channels, but he made one mistake. He used his corporate credentials to access a secure server where payment instructions were stored. The access logs show his authentication timestamp, and the server's location can be traced to a shell company that funnels money to the criminal organization. You can prove he accessed that server, I can prove someone using his credentials accessed it from a device registered to his corporate account during hours when he was logged into the AMT network. Combined with everything else, it establishes a pattern that goes beyond coincidence. Catherine absorbed this information, her security training processing implications and vulnerabilities. It's not enough for criminal prosecution. A good lawyer could argue his credentials were stolen, his device compromised. We're not trying to prosecute him tonight. We're trying to stop him from destroying Diana with fabricated evidence. If we can present this information to the board before Pierce makes his move, we shift the narrative. Instead of Diana on trial for whatever accusations Pierce has manufactured, Pierce becomes the focus of investigation. The strategy carried significant risk. If Pierce had allies on the board beyond those they had identified, the confrontation could backfire catastrophically. If the evidence was less convincing than Marcus believed, they would be dismissed as conspiracy theorists attempting to deflect legitimate concerns about Diana's leadership. But the alternative was allowing Pierce to execute his plan, unopposed, sacrificing Diana to protect their own positions. Catherine made her decision with the directness Marcus had come to expect from her. I've been watching Pierce for months, suspecting something but never having enough to act. You've given me the missing pieces. She gathered the documents into a secured folder. I'll present the technical evidence. You present the analysis and the connection to the kidnapping attempt. Together, we give the board reason to delay any action against Diana until a proper investigation can be conducted. And if Pierce has prepared for this possibility, if he has countermeasures we haven't anticipated, then we adapt. That's what people with our training do. Marcus touched the red bracelet beneath his sleeve, drawing strength from its familiar texture. Emma was safe at her grandparents' house, protected from whatever consequences tomorrow might bring. That knowledge freed him to accept risks he would otherwise have avoided. I'll need access to the board meeting. Pierce will try to exclude me if he realizes what we're planning. You're attending as my security consultant there to provide expert testimony on the kidnapping investigation. Pierce can't object without revealing that he has something to hide. They worked through the remaining hours of darkness, refining their presentation and anticipating counterarguments. Dawn arrived with the gray inevitability of October mornings, finding Marcus exhausted, but prepared for the confrontation ahead. The board meeting convened at 10 o'clock in the 40th floor conference room, a space designed to intimidate through sheer scale and expensive appointments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Boston, while a massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. 14 board members had gathered, their expressions ranging from bored routine to barely concealed anticipation. Jonathan Pierce occupied a seat near the chairman, his silver hair immaculately styled, his confidence evident in the relaxed posture of someone who believed victory was assured. A thick folder rested on the table before him, presumably containing whatever fabricated evidence he intended to deploy against Diana. Diana herself sat at the far end of the table, composed but visibly tense. She had been informed of the plan in broad strokes, but not details, trusting Marcus and Catherine to execute whatever strategy they had developed. The vulnerability in her position was apparent to everyone in the room, a CEO defending herself against accusations she had not yet heard, supported by a security chief whose loyalty Pierce had presumably not anticipated. Marcus entered with Catherine, taking a seat along the wall reserved for staff and consultants. Pierce's eyes tracked their movement, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features before professional composure reasserted itself. Chairman Douglas called the meeting to order with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted hundreds of such sessions. We're here to review Ms. Ashford's leadership performance over the past quarter following the board's previous directive regarding necessary improvements. Pierce, I understand you have prepared a presentation. Pierce rose with the smooth confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. Thank you, Chairman. As board members are aware, recent events have raised serious concerns about Ms. Ashford's judgment and the company's security posture under her leadership. I've compiled documentation that I believe warrants immediate action. He opened his folder, extracting photographs and printed documents that he distributed around the table. These materials demonstrate a pattern of financial irregularities in Ms. Ashford's management of discretionary funds, payments to consultants who provided no documented services, expense reports that failed to align with company travel policies, approvals for expenditures that bypass standard authorization procedures. Marcus examined the materials as they reached his position. The fabrications were sophisticated, combining genuine documents with altered records in ways that would require forensic analysis to distinguish. Pierce had clearly invested significant resources in preparing this attack. Diana's face had gone pale as she reviewed the accusations, recognizing the danger they represented, regardless of their falsity. These allegations are completely unfounded. I've never authorized payments outside proper channels, and any suggestion otherwise is Ms. Ashford will have opportunity to respond. Chairman Douglas interrupted. Mr. Pierce, please continue your presentation. Pierce smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose trap was functioning as designed. Beyond the financial irregularities, I've uncovered evidence suggesting that Ms. Ashford's security failures were not merely negligent, but potentially deliberate. The kidnapping attempt at Megamart may have been staged to generate sympathy and deflect from legitimate governance concerns. The accusation was audacious in its mendacity, transforming Diana from victim to conspirator through sheer force of repetition. Several board members shifted uncomfortably their expressions, suggesting they found the allegation difficult to credit, but felt obligated to consider it. Catherine rose from her position along the wall. Chairman Douglas, before Mr. Pierce continues, I need to present information directly relevant to the matters under discussion. Pierce's composure cracked slightly. This is a board presentation. Staff members don't interrupt too. The Chief Security Officer has standing to address security matters before the board, Douglas ruled. Ms. Shaw, please be brief. Catherine moved to the front of the room, positioning herself where all board members could observe her presentation. Over the past week, my office has conducted an investigation into the kidnapping attempt at Megamart, including forensic analysis of communications and financial transactions connected to the perpetrators. She distributed her own documents, carefully organized folders that contrasted with Pierce's scattered photographs. Our investigation has identified concerning connections between the criminal organization that orchestrated the attack and individuals within this company. Pierce's face had gone rigid, the confident predator suddenly recognizing that he might be prey. This is absurd. The chief security officer is attempting to deflect from legitimate concerns about Mrs. Ashford's leadership by inventing conspiracy theories. The evidence is not invented, Mr. Pierce. Catherine's voice carried the calm authority of someone presenting facts rather than arguments. Tyler Brennan, one of the attackers, maintained detailed records of his communications with the organization that recruited him. Those records include authentication logs showing that corporate credentials registered to your account were used to access servers containing payment instructions for the criminal operation. The room went silent. Board members who had been reviewing Pierce's fabricated documents now turned their attention to Catherine's materials, their expressions shifting from skepticism to alarm. Pierce attempted to recover. My credentials were obviously compromised. Any security professional would recognize the access occurred from a device registered to your corporate account during hours when you were logged into the AMT network from the same device. Catherine's presentation was relentless, each point building on the previous one. Additionally, your investment portfolio shows significant positions in companies that compete directly with AMT's core technology. If Ms. Ashford were removed and this company weakened by scandal, those investments would appreciate substantially. Marcus rose to supplement Catherine's presentation, adding the analytical framework that connected disparate evidence into coherent narrative. Mr. Pierce's pattern of behavior over the past 18 months shows systematic preparation for exactly this outcome. Meetings with individuals connected to competing firms, travel to locations with no legitimate business purpose, intervention in security decisions that left Ms. Ashford vulnerable to the attack that occurred at Megamart. He met Pierce's gaze directly. The materials you've presented today are fabrications designed to accomplish through corporate procedure what the kidnapping attempt failed to achieve through violence. Pierce stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is outrageous. I've served this company faithfully for 15 years. I won't stand here and be accused by a consultant who has been employed for less than a month. Then perhaps you can explain why your credentials accessed a server used by the organization that tried to kidnap our CEO. Catherine's question carried the weight of evidence that demanded answer. Or why your investment positions would benefit from exactly the outcome you're advocating today. The board erupted into cross-conversations, members questioning each other about what they had known and when. Chairman Douglas attempted to restore order, his gavel striking the table repeatedly, before silence grudgingly returned. Mr. Pierce, these allegations are extremely serious. Do you have any response beyond denial? Pierce's composure had deteriorated visibly, the confident executive replaced by someone recognizing that his carefully constructed plan was collapsing. This is a coordinated attack by individuals who have been co-opted by Ms. Ashford. The so-called evidence is manufactured, planted by someone with access to my credentials who wanted to frame me for. Then you won't object to a forensic investigation of your devices and communications. Catherine's interruption was surgical. If your credentials were compromised, as you suggest, forensic analysis will demonstrate that. If the evidence was planted, investigation will reveal the actual perpetrators. The trap closed with elegant finality. If Pierce consented to investigation, his guilt would be confirmed. If he refused, his refusal would itself constitute evidence of culpability. Pierce looked around the room, searching for allies who might intervene on his behalf. He found none. Even board members who had supported his presentation were now studying him with the wary distance of people reassessing their associations. I demand that these proceedings be suspended until I can consult with legal counsel. Mr. Pierce is suspended from his position, effective immediately pending investigation. Chairman Douglas's voice carried the authority of someone who had recognized the trajectory of events and positioned himself accordingly. Security will escort him from the building. His devices and files will be secured for forensic analysis. Catherine signaled to security personnel who had been positioned outside the boardroom, anticipating this outcome. Pierce was escorted from the room with the stunned expression of someone whose certainties had been demolished in the span of 30 minutes. The silence that followed his departure held a quality of collective reassessment. Board members who had arrived prepared to terminate Diana Ashford now faced evidence that they had nearly participated in a conspiracy against her. Chairman Douglas turned to Diana, his expression combining apology with renewed respect. Ms. Ashford, it appears that the board owes you a significant apology. The accusations Mr. Pierce presented are clearly suspect, and his behavior suggests involvement in activities that go far beyond professional misconduct. Diana rose from her position, and Marcus observed the transformation that occurred as she processed the implications of the morning's events. The vulnerability that had characterized her recent interactions gave way to something more complex: relief, certainly, but also recognition that the crisis had revealed truths about herself and her organization that could not be unlearned. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Webb and Ms. Shaw's investigation, and I'm grateful that the truth was revealed before irreparable damage occurred. She paused, choosing her next words with evident care. However, I want to acknowledge that the concerns underlying this situation are not entirely unfounded. My leadership style has created problems within this organization, problems that made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack Mr. Pierce orchestrated. The board's previous concerns about my approach to leadership were legitimate, even if Mr. Pierce exploited them for illegitimate purposes. The admission surprised several board members who had expected triumphant vindication rather than continued self-examination. The changes I've implemented over the past weeks, the focus on collaborative leadership, the attention to how I treat people at all levels of the organization, those aren't just responses to board pressure. They're genuine attempts to become the leader this company deserves. Diana's gaze found Marcus among the observers. I've had help recognizing what needed to change. I intend to continue that work regardless of today's outcome. Chairman Douglas nodded slowly, his assessment of Diana visibly recalibrating. Given the circumstances, the board will postpone any evaluation of your leadership until Mr. Pierce's investigation is complete. We need to understand the full scope of his activities before making judgments about anything else. The meeting concluded with administrative matters that seemed anticlimactic after the drama of Pierce's exposure. Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to depart, his role in the proceedings complete. Diana intercepted him in the corridor outside the boardroom. You saved me again. Her voice was quiet, intended only for his hearing. First at Megamart, now here. I'm running out of ways to express gratitude. You don't need to express gratitude. You need to continue the work you've started. Marcus met her gaze with the directness that had characterized their recent interactions. Pierce is exposed, but the reasons you were vulnerable to his attack remain. The changes you've made are real, but they need to become permanent. I know. Diana's expression combined determination with something approaching peace. I've spent my career believing that results justified methods, that excellence excused everything. Pierce used that belief against me, and he nearly succeeded. She extended her hand and Marcus shook it with the understanding that this gesture represented commitment rather than conclusion. Will you stay? Continue the work we've started. I'll stay as long as the work is meaningful and my family remains the priority. That's all I ask. The investigation that followed Pierce's suspension revealed the full scope of his conspiracy. He had spent 3 years cultivating relationships with criminal organizations, leveraging his position within AMT to provide intelligence that facilitated various schemes. The kidnapping attempt had been merely the most dramatic element of a broader plan to destabilize the company for personal profit. Criminal charges were filed within weeks, and Pierce's arrest made national news. The respected corporate executive revealed as a conspirator who had endangered his own CEO for financial gain. The story provided closure for the public narrative that had begun at Megamart, transforming isolated heroism into the first chapter of a larger tale of justice prevailing over corruption. Tyler Brennan's cooperation proved instrumental in building the case against Pierce. In exchange for testimony and evidence, prosecutors recommended reduced charges that acknowledged the desperate circumstances underlying his participation. He would serve time, but the sentence reflected the complexity of his situation rather than treating him as an irredeemable criminal. Marcus visited him once more before the plea agreement was finalized. Your son is responding to treatment. The money you were paid, it accomplished what you needed. Tyler nodded, his expression carrying the weight of someone reconciling impossible choices. It doesn't excuse what I did, I know that, but knowing he has a chance because of it. He trailed off, unable to articulate the emotional complexity of his situation. Thank you for understanding, for looking at me and seeing something more than a criminal. I saw someone who was pushed past their breaking point by circumstances that shouldn't exist. That doesn't excuse the choices you made, but it contextualizes them. Marcus rose to leave. When you get out, if you need help rebuilding, contact me. People deserve second chances when they're willing to earn them. 1 year after the events at Megamart, Marcus Webb stood in his corner office at Ashford Medical Technologies, reviewing security protocols for the company's annual charity gala. The transformation of his circumstances still struck him as improbable when he allowed himself to consider it. The modest ranch house in Quincy remained home, but the financial pressures that had defined his existence for 3 years had evaporated. Emma's educational future was secured. The night security shifts were distant memory. The careful invisibility he had cultivated since Rachel's death had given way to professional engagement that utilized his full capabilities. Diana Ashford had proven genuine in her commitment to change. The imperious executive who had dismissed Marcus as furniture was unrecognizable in the leader who now solicited input from all levels of the organization, who remembered the names of maintenance staff and security guards who had transformed AMT's culture from fear-based hierarchy to collaborative enterprise. The changes had not occurred without setback. Marcus had confronted Diana multiple times when old patterns emerged, calling out behavior that contradicted her stated values. She had accepted the criticism without defensiveness, using each incident as opportunity for growth rather than excuse for retreat. Their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, though Marcus maintained the boundaries that protected his capacity for honest assessment. Diana needed a mirror, not a sycophant, and he could only serve that function by preserving appropriate distance. The charity gala invitation had arrived a month earlier, extended to both Marcus and Emma as personal guests rather than professional obligation. The children's area includes science demonstrations from our research division. Emma might enjoy seeing how medical technology works. Diana had delivered the invitation during a routine meeting, her tone casual, but her expression suggesting the request carried personal significance. I'd like to meet her properly, not as the CEO, but as someone who owes her father more than I can ever repay. Marcus had discussed the invitation with Emma, presenting it as her choice rather than his obligation. The lady from the store wants to meet me. Emma's eyes had widened with the particular intensity she brought to significant social occasions. The one you saved, the same. She's been working very hard to become a better person, and she'd like you to decide if she's succeeded. Emma had considered this responsibility with characteristic gravity. I'll go, but only if I can wear my best dress and tell her the truth about whether she's learned to be nice. Those are acceptable terms. The gala itself transformed the Boston Museum of Natural Science into an environment of elegant philanthropy. Crystal chandeliers supplemented the museum's lighting, illuminating displays of AMT's medical innovations alongside the institution's natural history collections. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while Boston's elite mingled beneath the skeleton of a blue whale suspended from the ceiling. Emma arrived in the blue dress Marcus had purchased for the occasion, her expression combining excitement with the determined seriousness she adopted when facing important challenges. She had prepared for this encounter with the thoroughness she brought to school presentations, rehearsing questions designed to evaluate Diana's transformation. Diana met them at the entrance, her appearance striking in its understated elegance, black dress, minimal jewelry, none of the power signifiers that had once defined her professional presentation. She knelt to Emma's eye level without hesitation, a gesture that Marcus recognized as genuine rather than performative. You must be Emma. Your father has told me wonderful things about you. Emma studied Diana with the unfiltered assessment that only children could deliver. He says you're learning to be nice, but learning takes practice, so I need to see for myself. Diana accepted the evaluation with equanimity. That seems fair. What would you like to know? Do you remember people's names now? Daddy says you used to forget them because you thought you were more important. The directness of the question produced visible discomfort in Diana, but she did not deflect. I do remember names now. The woman who cleans my office is Margaret. She has 2 grandchildren, and her favorite color is yellow because it reminds her of sunshine. The security guard in the lobby is William. He served in the Navy and still follows football every Sunday. Emma processed this information, her expression suggesting that Diana had passed the first test. What about when people make mistakes? Do you yell at them? I try not to. When mistakes happen, I ask how I can help fix them instead of blaming the person who made them. Diana's voice carried the sincerity of someone genuinely reflecting on their behavior. I'm not perfect. Sometimes I forget and fall back into old patterns. But I catch myself more quickly now, and I apologize when I do. Apologizing is important. Emma nodded with the authority of someone who had received many parental lessons on this topic. Daddy says it doesn't undo the mistake, but it shows you know you were wrong. Your daddy is very wise. The evaluation continued as Diana led them through the gala, introducing Emma to the science demonstrations and research displays that had been prepared for younger attendees. Marcus observed the interaction with professional detachment, noting the genuine rapport developing between his daughter and the woman whose life he had saved. Diana explained medical technology in terms Emma could understand, answered questions with patience rather than condescension, and demonstrated interest in Emma's thoughts and observations that transcended polite performance. The CEO, who had once dismissed entire categories of humanity as beneath her notice, was engaging an 8-year-old as an equal deserving of respect. Near the end of the evening, Emma delivered her verdict with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing sentence. You have changed. You look at people now instead of through them, and you listen when they talk even when they are not important. She paused, adding the qualification that Marcus had learned to expect from his daughter. But you should keep practicing. Being nice isn't something you finish. It's something you do every day. Diana accepted the assessment with visible emotion. Thank you, Emma. That's the most meaningful feedback I've received all year. You're welcome. Emma reached out and took Diana's hand with the uncomplicated affection of childhood. Maybe we can be friends now. Daddy says you have to earn friends by being trustworthy. I'd like that very much. The drive home found Emma asleep before they reached the highway, exhausted by the evening's social demands. Marcus drove through quiet streets, with his daughters breathing soft in the back seat, reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been invisible, an IT contractor and night security guard, surviving rather than living, protecting Emma through carefully constructed routine rather than meaningful engagement with the world. The trip to Megamart had been about milk bread and a small stuffed bear, the modest rewards of modest existence. Now the bear rode in Emma's arms, companion to the journey home from a charity gala where his daughter had evaluated a CEO's personal growth. The red bracelet still circled his wrist, faded but intact reminder of lessons about courage and breathing that had guided him through transformation he never anticipated. Rachel would have approved. Marcus believed she had always wanted him to live fully rather than safely, to utilize his capabilities rather than suppress them, to engage with the world rather than retreat from it. Her death had driven him into hiding, but her memory now encouraged emergence. The house on Maple Street welcomed them home, unchanged in its modest dimensions, but transformed in its meaning. It was no longer a fortress of isolation, but a foundation for engagement, a place to return after adventures rather than a place to hide from possibility. Marcus carried Emma to her bed, settling her beneath familiar blankets with the bear clutched against her chest. She stirred briefly, her eyes opening just enough to confirm his presence. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart." I think the CEO lady really did learn. She's not perfect, but she's trying. Emma's eyes closed again, her voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "That's what you always say, trying is what matters." "That's right, sweetheart, trying is what matters." He stood in the doorway watching her sleep, this child who had taught him to breathe through panic attacks and had just evaluated the personal growth of a corporate executive. Emma had inherited Rachel's wisdom without ever knowing her mother had developed compassion and discernment through circumstance rather than instruction. The red bracelet caught the light from the hallway, its rough texture visible even in the dim illumination. Emma had made it during his darkest period, braiding yarn with small fingers while explaining that red was the color of courage and love. 3 years later, it remained his most valuable possession. Some lessons came from textbooks and training sessions. Others came from children who understood truths that adults complicated with doubt and hesitation. Marcus had learned about security and threat assessment from professional instruction, but he had learned about courage and purpose from his daughter. The story that had begun at Megamart was not concluded. Stories of transformation never truly ended, only continued into new chapters with new challenges. Pierce awaited trial. Diana continued her evolution. Emma grew and developed with each passing day, and Marcus himself was still learning what it meant to live fully rather than merely survive. But standing in his daughter's doorway on a quiet evening, 1 year after everything changed, Marcus Webb allowed himself a moment of contentment that had been absent from his emotional landscape since Rachel's death. They had built something worthwhile from tragedy. Emma was thriving. The work was meaningful. The future held possibility rather than mere endurance. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, as tomorrows always did. But tonight, the grocery store hero who had never sought that title could rest in the knowledge that courage and love, the qualities his daughter had woven into a rough red bracelet, had guided them both toward lives worth living. The small bear on Emma's pillow wore a red bow around its neck, matching the bracelet on Marcus's wrist. Father and daughter bound by symbols of what they had survived and what they had become. Some purchases at Megamart cost $47.32. Others cost everything you had and returned more than you ever imagined.